And that was our little Zappa extravaganza.
Awesome set, Bob.
Yeah, wasn't that great? And here's what you heard, Bert. We began with Jumbo Go Away. Then we listened to Jones Crusher, then Jonestown, then Joe's Garage, then maybe Janet's Big Dance Number, and It Ain't Necessarily the St. James Infirmary, It Must Be a Camel, Jesse Lee, and ended with Johnny Darling, which was only 56 minutes. Now, there's Katie Thomas saying good morning. Maybe she might have something interesting to say. Let's see if she's phoned in. Web control, there it is. Yeah, if you want to participate in the Zappa dialogue, Katie, I don't know how much you know about Zappa. Who's that on the anonymous? I just demuted. Katie, when is that? Is it 2:34? What time is that? 2:23. Just a couple minutes ago. So type in, Katie, if you can't make it. Okay, so we had a good stretch of variety there. Frank's range of creativity. Katie says you're going to call in. Okay, good. And then we're going to hear Bert, the, what could you say, the president of Student Council, the ass licker of the year. Hello, Katie.
No.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Hey, do you know much about Zappa, Katie?
No, nothing.
Well, let's see what you can pick up from this, because you can improvise ideas as they occur to you.
Sure.
Well, Bert, you had me and Roxy being the experts, and Bert was the newbie, and he ass-kissed his way all the way to the top of the class, doing his homework, reading up on the background and making discoveries, and actually was quite amazed eventually at the phenomenon of Frank Zappa. So we chose Bert. What is it they do in school? They pick the best student to give the essay of the year. And Bert got nominated for doing that because he said he went back and read my manifesto from 1995 called Up the Orphic Ante, and part 2 is called Silencing the Virtually Solar Theater. And Zappa's a big part of that, the themes in those two essays that predicted ion and everything. And Bert noticed that, so I'd be interested in what patterns he notices in it, and then what it evokes for me, what new ideas might occur to me just because someone's commenting on them. You know?
Yeah. Good job, Bert.
Yeah. Bert was. I don't know. Do I have one more funny remark to make? Let's see. Yeah, Bert did his homework, and he has been rewarded well. And now he can have the final word, almost, the last word, from Bert, the recently freed man under the new Reconstruction Act.
I read. Well, first, what sparked this is that we were talking about McLuhan, and it was we were talking about the virtual March of McLuhan with Mr. Thiel, and then Bob commented and gave him 104 edits. So I asked Bob about it, and Bob shot me the essay of McLuhan, the Holypathic Quadriphenia Mouse That Roared Syndrome. And I started reading it, and which is always interesting when I look at Bob's work. It's many detours in the work. And I think it was right after the phase 2 of the McLuhan essay, it said, see up the orthic ante and silencing the virtual solar theater. So I took the detour. I read up the orthic ante maybe 2 years ago, And at that time, it was a lot of information to absorb. But I reread it.
You were still a slave, Bert. You know, you had not.
A literate slave. Yes, a literate slave.
Yeah.
So I read the up the Orphic Ante, and there was some highlights in there, and it was right at the end. Actually, all through it was a lot of revelations of things that after the last 2 years came to light. But at the end, right at the end, Bob talked about the physics. Yeah. That was one thing that sparked to me, the physics, and about it's just one page. Since 1900, our bodies under electric conditions can only be considered as subatomic particles. Modern physics, especially quantum modeling, has always only been describing our social actualities. The same applies to modern chemistry, particularly genetics. And that blew my mind, because when you look at what we're involved with ion and the completement formulas, we're changing the basic core of what we are. So that was just the beginning of a wow for me. And then at the end, Bob talks about the D cell, and that he and Carolyn are the new Adam and Eve. So the
Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve?
Adam and Eve. Adam in the Bible.
Right. But if Bert's talking about that we're changing on an atomic level, wouldn't that be a good play on words? Atom and Eve?
Oh, yeah, good one.
Yeah. And then also at the end, he talks about Pons and Fleischmann with the, which we know used to be cold fusion, but now Bob and Carolyn and JW brought through Coldplay. So that was quite an interesting read. But what really blew my mind, and I've emailed Bob about, is that then I read Silencing the Virtual Soul of Theater, and then it was amazing how much more was spoken about DNA, vortexes, and how Zappa is interwoven into what Zappa means to lock down Bob Rule. It's
right.
So many quotes. I mean, it's funny, you were talking earlier, Bob, you were talking about Nelson Thal and Ivan Stang, and that was one thing that I read. It talks about that Ivan Stang and Nelson Thal were John the Baptist. You consider them John the Baptist for you, yeah. But then you also followed up that Zappa was the third John the Baptist due to his release of The Man from Utopia.
Yes.
And the one question I have is that he confirmed in his autobiography your religion. So there's a question there.
Yes.
What was your religion? He described on page 234 of his autobiography.
That's right. He says if he did have a religion, it would be the Bob Dobbs, J.R. Bob Dobbs Church Subgenius religion.
Wow. Okay.
That's what you're referring to. You read it?
No, I didn't read the autobiography. I'm just talking about the one reference in the Silencing the Virtual Soul of Theater.
Right, you didn't know the details of it.
No, I didn't know the details, so you fill that in just real quickly. That was...
Yeah.
So, but Frank really plays a big part in your chart in Lockdown Bob Rule. Your charts at the top says the Grand Wazoo's Decade Dance. And it's all interwoven in this essay. It's amazing. It is amazing, and especially talking about the DNA and how Frank anticipated the new matter through you and Carolyn.
Yeah.
And here's one. Frank Zappa, because he truly anticipated the Promethean creation of the new matter with his ecstatic Manipian musical inventions, and because he mimed the lonely flight of Rai to the max, to the point of putting cancer right up the yin-yang with a blinding mirror, What an ear-splitting echo. Frank understood how advertising advertises advertising, and he used this principle to point the new substance of Bob and Connie. It's like a prophecy, Bob, for me. I mean, this is 20 years ago. 20 years ago, to read this, and, you know, almost you want to call everybody up and say, do you know what's really this? I mean, a lot of what I see, it makes sense to me of all that you know that you would have to forget. Because if you remembered everything, no one would be able to talk to you.
Right. Yeah, I must forget every day.
You have to forget every day. You'd have to be, I mean, like a lot of people when, like if someone first dials in and they hear about H.M.L. Hobab and it's 6,000 or, you know, so many thousand years old, they think it's crazy. But when you start to put these pieces of the puzzle together with Ion appearing and how Ion has said that they're changing the whole history, and that's something that you've always said, you have to really open up that there is no time, because when I read this last week, it blew me away because I'm like, this is what's going on right now.
Yeah.
This is what's going on right now. And then you also spoke about the infinity. You talk about the new breed is 2 zeros touching, which can suggest the number 8 lying on its side, invoking infinity or eternity, with apostle as implied by Zappa's new symbolic logo on his business card. So Zappa had a infinity logo on his business card, huh? Wow.
Yeah, a Mobius strip, infinity circle. Yeah. And his company was called Why Not? Question mark. Why not? and basically, the original intention was to encourage Russian business. The breakup of Russia in 1989, 90, 91, and he said, if we don't help them in some way, they'll revert back to communism or Stalinism or something. And so he, because he knew some of the top musicians in Russian culture, they'd been fans of his, he felt sympathetic. He found the Russians people really interesting people. He liked them. So he set up a way of trying to help them keep their businesses world going, or starting, teach them about capitalism stuff. That's what Why Not was about.
Yeah.
And, of course, he was named cultural ambassador for Czechoslovakia from the United States. So Czechoslovakia announces that he is some kind of cultural liaison with the United States. And Secretary of State James Baker, his wife had been on the PMRC, the press rock band, the bad lyrics stuff in 1985 that led to Frank, testifying in Congress. Because he had mocked James Baker's wife, he was out to get him, and as soon as he heard that, what was the name of that guy, the head of Czechoslovakia? Forget his name now. He's gone, but he had been a fan of Frank when he was a playwright and artist in the 70s. So he remembered Frank. Vaclav Havel, that was his name, Vaclav Havel. So he appointed Frank, and as soon as James Baker heard this, he was flying to Russia or someplace. He turned the plane around and went right to Prague, Czechoslovakia, marched up to the palace where Havel was, and said, if you have Zappa as cultural ambassador, then you can stop doing business with the United States. So he was going to cut him off at the key vortex. So when Zappa heard that, he said, oh, geez, I'm not going to screw up your country. You don't have to give it to me. I'll back off. It's more important that you start getting the scarce money that's around through linking up with American business. So Frank resigned from the assignment. But that was the beginning of his sort of being recognized as helping the post-Berlin Wall ex-Soviet Union. And he was thinking of running for president in the middle of that.
Yeah, you mentioned in the essay, this one note that I had, that Frank, you said that Frank stopped touring in 1988 and emphasized his suggestions to dismantle the Berlin Wall for the next few years in order to illustrate the social engineering Tetrad manner aspects of his solar theater. So Frank was also talking about, but did you feed him that information? Did you suggest that to him?
Yes, I told him about, But he was on, he might have done a concert or two in spring of '88 on Near the Wall or something. It's something about that. Because he comes on Johnny Carson or one of those shows in the summer of '88. And the band, I think the tour had just stopped. It imploded. The band members started fighting among themselves, so he had to cancel the tour. And he goes on Johnny Carson or something. He talks about this concert around the Berlin Wall, and he says it should be taken down. It's irrelevant. And no one was thinking about the Berlin Wall at that point in '88.
Yeah.
And he made a big issue out of it. And that was unique. And then it was gone a year later. So just like LaRouche made a broadcast on Halloween 1988 about Germany being reunited. So it was the Evergreens, me, LaRouche, and Zappa who kind of focused on the Berlin Wall and said that it was going to go away.
There was also a quote that I also found interesting. You state that as Zappa invokes my body from the landscape like a fractal in search of a strange attractor, he translates into a virtual, xenocronous, conceptual sound environment that desperately longs for feelings and sensations of quadrophenia, the contents of which have already been described above and are anthropomorphized by 10 homeopathic code signals. Brussels, Christian Mirror, I mean, this is it's like a science document, Bob. This is a science document that, I mean, you have sociology, anthropology, you have physics, chemistry, all mixed into this. This is it's amazing, but it shows that Frank, that's the thing that, like, you know, when I read this, I told you that it made me reflect on all of our previous, from listening to you and Roxana talk about him. He was really, I think we talked about it before, he's a polymath. I mean, he was so rich.
Yeah.
I mean, he wasn't just a musician. He was really very astute in where he was and what was going on and what he was doing and what he was trying to project. He was, I mean, what you would say, he was a really thorough guy. I mean, he did have his biases, which that's something that I noticed in reading the Orphic Ante, that all of your holy offices, they have biases, and you're the only one that doesn't. And now you're standing on top of all their heads with Ion, and that's where we are here today. So that's what's fun to read this. It's amazing. It's really amazing to see this. I mean, just Frank. Also, I've been reading LaRouche, which is quite interesting. You call him now the homeopathic radio, no longer referred to LaRouche. But it's really interesting to read all of these holy offices. But Frank is very special for me because, as you know, I used to be a musician a long time ago, and how he really just used it as a tool. He was really a very sharp soldier, or general, as you could say, of fighting.
Right.
Amazing.
Yeah, I'm just looking at, I'm going to read the Frank part. It's the, so I have here, however, I'm talking about the baby boomers are the 22 vortex, the Generation X is the 14 vortex, and then the new batch, or the millennials, I didn't have that term then, but the kids born around the time of the Berlin Wall going down the end of the Cold War. So I call them the new batch, and I was quoting Captain Beefheart. He did a song about the new batch, best batch yet. So I say, however, the new batch play with both vortexes, 22 and 14, with a feeling of optimistic hyper-boredom, because these spirals are in their genes. They can enjoy any of my fellow satellite composers, that's the holy orifices, as Zion calls them, because they just feel that Bob and Connie won. So they feel optimistic. Now this brings us to why Frank Zappa was the only survivor after the deluge of 1987, the flood of 1987. And so I say, remember when I declared to Mike Dyer, who was my co-host of CKLN, and the vicinals, that means the environment, audience of CKLN, and we're inside each other's guts electrically, proprioceptively, so you call them vicinals. Remember when I declared to Mike Dyer and the vicinals of CKLN around Toronto in March of 1988 after winning over the Secret Council of 10, quote, even Bob and Connie need an audio enema. As George, Ian Arlett, my bodyguard, Connie and I headed off to Buffalo for another Zappa concert during his awesome tour of the best band you never heard. So the best band you never heard, that's a question. Remember that? For satellite conductors, music is the best, and it was Frank Zappa who constantly exuded quadrophenia/ecstasy in every moment of his lifelong composition/chemical explosion. And there is no doubt that his alchemy pointed the way to creating the new life in quotes, that Bob and Connie promised, and is the reason Connie wears a different Zappa T-shirt in her laboratory every day. She had many Zappa T-shirts, and that was true.
Wow.
In New York. She'd wear a different Zappa T-shirt. By the way, I say, it is interesting to observe that both competing John the Baptist for the Dobbs couple, Reverend Ivan Stang and Nelson Thal, and remember, Stang would have sued Thal for Bosnia Ecology albums if Thal was in the States. So you have a real polarity there. But Thal was a Canadian, so Stang couldn't get at him. That both competing John the Baptist for the Dobbs couple began to surface in the same year, 1983. Stang gets on the radio, starts on with the Church Subgenius, and Nelson gets involved with me. Okay, and that other, let's see. All right, so those two, John the Baptist, Reverend Stang, and Nelson Thal, and then I go, and that other fulfillment of the mandate from Finnegan's Wake, Frank Zappa revealed his role as a third John the Baptist for us when he released his album The Man from Utopia in 1983, same year, and later confirmed this when he stated his preference for one of the interpretations of My Religion on page 234 of his autobiography, The Real Frank Zappa Book, 1989. Now, The Man from Utopia is about the concert in Sicily in Zappa's 1982 tour when he was in Italy, and he plays at a concert, and there is a riot that breaks out. So,
wow, yeah, you talked about that.
Right, and so I'm mentioning this in 1995, the album The Man from Utopia, or The Man from Slack Zone, and that's what I am. But on the album cover, it's Zappa playing a painting of Zappa, but he's swatting flies and mosquitoes, and there's tear gas being thrown, and there's a big riot all around him. It's almost like a biblical scene in the Book of Revelation. So then, 2004, October 2014, I go to the Marin County Film Festival to see the documentary made about that trip and that concert, because and this was Zappa also visiting where his parents were from, small place, small town, can't remember the name, very humble beginnings. So he's going back to see his roots in 1982, and he plays in Palermo probably, and the people didn't really know how to put rock concerts on, so they had Zappa's stage was in the middle of this big football stadium, and the audience was like a mile away. they were over the football stand. So there was a huge gap between Zappa and the audience. And then when the concert started and the audience couldn't hear it, they started rioting and throwing tear gas, and then I think the cops came out and fought them. So this total chaos happened. And this is in the summer of '72, when there's a war between the mafia and the police and generals, with many of the top justices and generals being killed by the mafia. And there was some other aspect politically going on there. So it was a very dangerous time in Italy. So Frank is there. So in 1984, the footage of that, some Italian guy who got his father to drive him to the concert, he didn't get to the concert. They got held up by whatever, traffic or something. But he heard about it, and he eventually made this documentary going back, and he got footage from the Zappa family, and he has Gail and her children, Dweezil and Moon. I don't know if Ahmet was there. And they go back in 2012 or something and visit where Zappa's parents came from. And they go to the house and they find it. And then they meet actual Zappa's relatives that they did not know but were still there. So this whole reunion around this summer concert from 1982 and comes out called The Man from Utopia. I attend the premiere of that documentary and interact with Gail Zappa on October 6th and 7th, and then she dies exactly a year later, October 7th, 2015. So this album turned out to be my last, content in the Zappa world. This theme, The Man from Utopia. Are you still with us, Katie?
Oh, I am. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. You're following this.
Yep.
So that's kind of synchronistic. Now, on the tiny note chart, Zappa talked about the big note. So I call this the little note, and it's Xenocrates, Bob's tiny note. So Xenocrates comes from Frank. Tiny note comes from Frank. The grand wazoo of the decade dance or decadence comes from Frank. The hidden ground is really Zappa because he's the one who's got the latest technology. He's a musician.
Yeah.
He can communicate and reach a lot more people than McLuhan can or LaRouche or anybody, because he is on the leading edge of the important drug of the masses, music. And he also does other media too, and his goal was to have a TV show, Johnny Carson nightly talk show, where they would do a satire of news stories. And so it was a pretty lofty ambition, but it didn't happen. So Zappa was aground. I made a sub-play in 1984, and it was about the interaction of all the holy offices, and I made Zappa be the punchline. He was like he won out over the others. And I replay that here where I say he's the only one who survived the deluge in 1987. So what happened in 1987? All right, here's the deluge. So by 1990, I write, there was nothing to be done but to study the effects of electrified waiting on waiting, the effects of waiting on waiting to see if Bob and Connie made it to 1992 in some kind of physical state. This meant that the other 9 evaporated satellite composers would only exist as much as I focused my attention and interest on them. This is all that would resuscitate them until their final decomposition in 1987. 1987, that year saw 1. The fruitless and futile revival of Marsh McLuhan with the publication of his letters. The beginning of the railroading of Lyndon LaRouche into jail. The turmoil in the Worldwide Church of God, that's Herbert W. Armstrong, in the year after the death of Herbert W. Armstrong in 1986. The death of Dr. Peter Beater. The surfacing of cancer in Mae Brussell. The surfacing of health problems in Frank Zappa. The surfacing of revelations and scandals about Krishnamurti in the year after his death in 1986. And the inability of Garrett Dean to find me after 1986. So all the holy offices were under great stress in 87. So Zappa was a survivor of that. So then do I say anything else? Let's see. What am I looking at? This is silence verse, okay. So Zappa. So then I say, I'm talking about Frank anticipating the new life. So I go, what is this new life? Life in quotes. The new batch, post-1990, of Manipians express themselves a la Forrest Gump, which was a movie about 1994, and Beavis and Butthead, by pretending to be dumb and dumber about the passé contents of both the 22 vortex, that's the baby boomers, which is East Coast and Atlantean, and involves LaRouche, McLuhan, Krishnamurti, and Beater. And the 14 vortex, West Coast and Lemurian, which is Mae Brussel, Frank Zappa, Garrett Dean, and Herbert W. Armstrong. The old DNA was made up of the intertwined spirals of 22 and 14. And from 1953 to 1993, we witnessed its unraveling and melting. I'm talking about the old DNA. The new D-squared DNA exists with the resultant alchemy produced by the mere addition. So the new D-squared NA, DNA, but a 2 in there to indicate squared. The D-squared NNA, or DNA squared, I don't know if that's written right. Someone else may have typed that wrong. The new DNA squared exists with the resultant alchemy produced by the mere addition of decelled water, the new philosopher's stone. This began to be manufactured and distributed in 1994 after the deaths of Jordan Sloan, Sun Ra, Walter Fishman, Garrett Dean, and Frank Zappa in 1993, and Charles Bukowski in 1994. The number characterizing the new breed is 2 zeros touching, which can suggest the number 8 laying on a side, evoking infinity or eternity, or the possible, not the impossible, or the possible, as implied by Zappa's new symbolic logo on his business card and also on the album cover of Broadway the Hard Way, 1988. Let's see. 8 is the interval between 22 and 14, and 1/2 of 8 is 4. So 18 is retrieved by adding and subtracting 4 to 14 and from 22, respectively. 18 is an appropriate symbol of transition to the new for Bob and Connie's kids because they are in the interval of Manipian indifference to the old DNA spirals of 22 and 14. Hence their obsession, these new batch, their obsession with the Orphic gods of Eros, that's the world government, Chaos, the solar government, Gaia, the universal government, and Orpheus, the mythic government. And remember, Orpheus tuned the whole world. The physical forces / principles of the cult of Isis and her number 18. And these kids are obsessed with this stuff until they contact me or Connie and are shown via the Pentad the way of the decade dancer or decad dancer squared. 10 by 10 equals 100. And the final Orphic conductor. So conductor, but it becomes con man also, CON-doctor. And the final Orphic conductor to play the music to accompany the ritual dance of the child killer. That's major song on the 4th side of the first album, Freakout, Ritual Dance of the Child Killer. And I have that in brackets, decade dancer, decad dancer seed, is, of course, Frank Zappa. And Frank Zappa, too, because he truly anticipated the Promethean, like Prometheus, who's a LaRouche hero. The Promethean, he anticipated the Promethean creation of the new matter with his ecstatic Manipian musical inventions in quotes, and because he mimed the lonely flight of Rai to the max, like he was the last Rai returning to the plane of essence, the last separate genius. To the point, he mimed the lonely flight to the point of putting cancer right up his own yin-yang. What a blinding mirror, what an ear-splitting echo. Frank understood how advertising advertises advertising, and he used this principle to point to the new substance of Bob and Connie. See, this is talking like I sell. The new substance capitalized. Yeah. Okay, listen to this. You read it a little too fast, so you missed some of the actual important words. Using the quark tune, which is a quark, subatomic particle, mixed with media dynamics that come alive, or the Endor meme, and that's the cartoon. So I made this word up, the quark-toon. And in quotes, mu masons get me hot. Mu masons were a category of subatomic particles that Zappa talked about in the 60s. Using the quark-toon as a guiding motif, Zappa sang the body swallowing. He sang the body swallowing. He sculpted Bob Dobbs' formula. That's the bigger chart. How the media archetypes fit the Battle of Jericho with such precision that even his own most astute fans are still stunned into a blurred perception of Zappa's project/object. For example, see the book, The Negative Dialectics of Poodle Play, composed by a collective under the name of Ben Watson. That was a joke. Ben Watson was the singular author, but he was quite a controversial character, so I called him, and he did use a lot of Zappa friends' knowledge, so I called them a collective. So, for example, see the book, The Negative Dialectics of Poodle Play, that came out in 94, composed by a collective under the name of Ben Watson. However, this book is essentially very useful if negative dialectics, in quotes, negative dialectics. Now, this interview you sent me, Bert, for tonight, from Telos, by that Balpaccio guy, that name, that Italian. Telos is the journal for negative dialectics. So it's appropriate you bring that up. So I'm saying back then, 20-plus years ago, however, this book by Ben Watson, which is inspired a lot by Theodore Adorno, however, this book is essentially very useful if negative dialectics is understood as a Manipian interpretation of Zappa's Manipian action, disguised as a pragmatic socialist exegesis. The theorem data in action, DAD, the art movement, the theorem data in action unfortunately refers only to historical activities that are too tiny to encompass the actions of the corporate dataists. That's Madison Avenue and the Pentagon. They're dataists whose tetradic skills I helped Frank glimpse, tetradic management skills. As Zappa evokes my body, as he evokes them, imagine somebody, Zappa fan, reading this. What is this maniac? As Zappa evokes my body, now, which is this huge fucking body that I sometimes I say, Jesus Christ, when I am claiming what I'm Ophanel 10,000 years, he's just translating what I wrote. You know what I mean? He's just getting it from me. He just completes it. As Zappa evokes my body from the landscape, as Zappa evokes my body from the landscape like a fractal in search of a strange attractor, he translates into a virtual xenarchonous conceptual/sound environment the desperately longed-for feelings and sensations of quadrophenia, the contents of which have already been described above and are anthropomorphized by 10 homeopathic code symbols. And I say, May Brussels, Krishnamurti, Beater, etc. As an explanatory aside, it might be useful for you to know that Frank had to stop touring in 1988 and emphasize his suggestions to dismantle the Berlin Wall for the next few years in order to illustrate the social engineering or Tetrad manager aspects of his own solar theater. Time was running out since the collapse of 1987, even though he would be the last to blow the bagpipes. In the accompanying chart in Tetrads in this issue of Flipside, where this article was originally published, you will notice that Zappa obsolesces Finnegan's Wake. Woo! Goes on Finnegan's Wake. This is because Frank presents entertainment for the Pentad manager. That's the Tetrad manager squared. In his Manipian satire of that pre-Pons and Fleischmann penguin in bondage, the Tetrad manager. In brackets, is this why some critics say Zappa favors the pentatonic scale? This explains why Bill and Hillary Clinton, junior Tetrad managers, if there ever were, have provided such entertaining abuse value from Croker, as the homeopathic Baroque spiral of the Orphic mythic government. As Lockdown Bob Rule, which is the new matter, begins and discontinuous homeopathic retrievals run protective cover for this fact, the old friction-based DNA can only reappear as a recombinant mutant virus, as shown by the hilariously ridiculous fate of Dr. Robert Gallo. He was the grand wazoo of the AIDS lie. And his silly efforts to explain and treat the effects of the HIV virus, and he was Manipian tactilely run amok. Let's see. No, the AIDS virus is Manipian tactilely run amok on, particulate level. All through his career, Frank has remained consistent in his exploitation of the nomenclature of postmodern scientific modeling as an actor/puppet for a solar theater orchestra. Since he conducted from the vantage point of the Pentad manager, that means the confronting and playing back to the android meme, technology come alive. Since he conducted from the vantage point of the Pentad manager, he intuited the anthropomorphical physical rise of me and Connie. See, for example, I have this in brackets, the map of Nova Scotia on the inside sleeve of Uncle Meat, which came out in 1969. And since, quote, the word makes the market from 1953 to 1993, a speech-based musical composition is the most fitting metaphor for this 40-year period. And Frank, soon to be a national treasure, will be duly honored because he blew it up real good. I'm quoting the Second City Mackenzie brothers. Have you ever seen that humorous Canadian show, came out of Toronto, in the Second City theater movement. He will be duly honored because he blew it up. They would blow up stuff, the Mackenzie brothers, and they go, hey, I'd blow it up real good. So Frank will be duly honored because he blew up the word makes the market and the Android meme real good. So then I have a quote from Arthur Croker. He says, consequently, the steady announcement, and this is from 1994, again, a lot of things happening in 94. Consequently, the steady announcement of new telematic discoveries, such as molecular computer chips, cell-sized nano bioengines for invisible travel through the bloodstream, new genetic hybrids from the labs of all the recombinant geneticists. Consequently, the steady announcement of these discoveries attracts not a ripple of discontent, nor a muted cry of ideological discord, because these manifestations of technology outreach into the body electronic are less a brave new horizon of telematic wilderness clear-cutting than an already nostalgic sign of our wired past. So he doesn't know it, but he's predicting the iCell. That would be more significant than stuff working from regular genetics.
Yeah.
And then I have a quote from William Irwin Thompson from 1977. When we come down to the DNA, the basic alphabet of information in the cell, there are 4 nucleotides, much like the 4 base in Carl Jung. Then Thompson asks, what is this fourness that seems to be a program or a score for the way things happen? If we take the 4 nucleotides and assemble them in a table, as Crick did in the guy who discovered or made the DNA, as Crick did in 1965, that table becomes isomorphic to the I Ching, as Gunther Stent has pointed out. Then the third quote from James Joyce, page 593, the first page of the last chapter, which is actually a chapter that merges into the first chapter. In the resurrection section, the line is, a hand from the cloud emerges holding a chart expanded. So that's my chart, right? There's Finney's predicting it. Then I say, there have been 3 Copernican revolutions. The first one, this would be the original Copernicus one when it was at 1500 or so. The first Copernican revolution threw humanity's image of itself to the edge of the universe. The second Copernican revolution, thanks to Immanuel Kant, folded humanity back into inner space. The third Copernican revolution, using the technique of the suspended judgment, addicted humanity to the cognitive thrills of pattern recognition in the 20th century. Those 3 Copernican revolutions were created by, was a pattern that McLuhan created. So then, even when we come back to Zappa again, and since 1967, the Tetrad manager has used pattern recognition as an art form, leaving the Pentad manager to square that process via synachrony, in which we mime coevolutionary anticipatory mimesis, in brackets, effects preceding causes, by imitation as the sincerest form of battery rather than flattery, in brackets, causes merging with effects. In light of William Burroughs' lifelong rearguard action of documenting the orgasm of the universe, what's that? In light of William Burroughs' lifelong rearguard action of documenting the orgasm the universe had 100 years ago, it might prove instructive to look at the crop circles being made around this planet by our soon-to-be friends from the Bootes constellation, so we even predict where they're going to come from, in order to understand the geometry/choreography of my anticipatory decade dancing implied in the chart in this issue of Flipside. I think serious meditation on the crop circle shapes will lead to a glimpse that these patterns are an attempt to imitate that synachrony which occurred in response to the path traveled on the way to the era of lockdown Bob rule. In short, Connie and I are a homeopathic retrieval of that old notion of the strange attractor, and more. And of course, the effort to name us was best conceived and performed by Frank Zappa with the consistent self-reflexive motif of the ritual dance of the child killer. What do you call this show, or Tuesday? What youth? We killed them all off, right? We out-youthed them. I hadn't thought of that before. What youth has been anticipated by the ritual dance of the child killer? Are you with me, guys? Did I get disconnected? Okay.
No, I'm here.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, and of course, here we go. And of course, the effort to name us was best conceived and performed by Frank Zappa with the consistent self-reflexive motif of the, quote, ritual dance of the child killer, in brackets, see Freak Out, that first album. That ritual, that motif, all through all of his work, the effort to name us was best conceived and performed by Frank Zappa with the consistent self-reflexive motif of the ritual dance of the child killer through all of his work. And who was that phrase referring to? Why, that well-known and special dwarf Rumpelstiltskin, the one who was free to wreak havoc by demanding the sacrifice of the firstborn, the ritual dance of the child killer, until he was caught when his real name was overheard. This midget is mentioned in numerous songs by Frank and is even featured in the movie 200 Motels, where Ringo Starr plays a Zappa lookalike named Larry the Dwarf. See also other songs, Uncle Bernie's Farm, the cover photo of Lumpy Gravy, that came out in 1967, Dwarf Nebula Processional March, and Dwarf Nebula, their songs, Robert D. Nameland in The Adventures of Gregory Peccary, Camarillo Brillo, Pygmy Twilight, The Torture Never Stops, and the fact that Zappa described his own home as done in the style of Rumpelstiltskin decor. And the axis or nub of the tiny note chart is Rumpelstiltskin down in the right-hand bottom corner. And so I say it was very satisfying for Frank to counter the Alice in Wonderland themes coming out of the rival hippie scene of Club 23 in San Francisco. Compliments of the Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead et al. Compliments of the Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead et al. With his menacing Rumpelstiltskin theme. Ever since Frank and Don Van Vliet, or originally known as Don Vliet, met us in 1958, they always figured Bob and Connie Dobbs were the tallest midgets in the world because they luckily guessed, Frank and Don, that the image of the midget/dwarf was the appropriate symbol for the homeopathic cliché probe. Consequently, Zappa's hologram of Xenocrates imitative battery, imitation being the sincerest form of battery, around me. So consequently, Zappa's hologram of Xenocrates imitative battery around me remained consistently powerful. Then I say, check this out. And it says, Richard Nixon was a hot Tetrad manager. Ronald Reagan was a cool Tetrad manager. George Bush was a panic hot Tetrad manager. Bill Clinton is a panic cool Tetrad manager. So, in the last paragraph, is there any more, Frank? All have been wonderful. All have been wonderful fodder as Orphic Baroque spirals from 1977 to 1997, undergoing the necessary abuse value, which is post-use and exchange values, which is a required economic motor to provide distraction away from locking down Bob Rule. While Frank Zappa, in brackets, media ecologist, pentadic species of media ecologist, while Frank Zappa kept the vigilant beat to silence the solar anus. And all during this period, the homeopathic retrieval of the entire contents of the human unconscious, both private and collective, i.e. Finneg's Wake, has been the great resource via the discontinuous homeopathic cliché probe to bypass inevitable fate in order to achieve the frictionless based energy of Chakrik City. You know, the chakras of Chakrik City. But this is just, that was my update of the magnetic city of Wyndham Lewis and the global village of McLuhan. So we bypass inevitable fate in order to achieve the frictionless based energy of Chakrik City. But this is just another pattern that I hope the new batch can ignore, because your time in quotes, which has no precedent, is coming. So it's very appropriate that Flipside magazine is the magazine/satellite of choice to celebrate what is waiting for you as a result of Connie's and my work. Because all through history, people have always become their names. Then I have a P.S. My tiny note is always heard shooting out of the Grand Wazoo's mystery horn. In brackets, device, mystery device. So, that's it. There it is. That's the conclusion. What is it? Brainy, jargonistic, thickly dense summary of the point of this series on Zappa. The Ionic Anticipation by Frank and other John the Baptist.
Yes.
So that's an enlargement of what Bert was going. So what ideas did you get from this, Katie? What translates into your subjectivity?
Well, I was thinking about Frank last week, and that's how I came across Howard Rheingold, who I was going to talk to you about someday, not now, because there's a book of essays called Creators on Creating, and Frank had an essay in there about composition. And I was looking
I've
for it, but
never seen that. I didn't. Hey, Katie, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I've never seen that, as far as I know. That's interesting.
Okay, well, so I couldn't find the essay. We'd have to buy the book. I can send you a link to the book. I don't know if it's worth it to buy the book just for that one essay, but I was curious about how Frank got his inspiration as a composer. So that's why that's my initial area of interest of Frank. The rest of what you just talked about is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting, as you were talking, I was scrolling through, too, because I don't know what you think about Howard Rheingold. I think he's probably kind of outdated. But in one of his books, too, which I'm also not going to buy, he's got a chapter called The New Copernican Revolution.
Oh.
So it is interesting. I mean, I don't know what to make of any of it, but it is interesting that I was thinking about this, that I had wanted to talk to you about this, that I was curious about Frank's sources of inspiration. I was looking for books and ideas about inspiration just for my own writing, and then there's. I mean, I would be interested if you could tell me what a Copernican revolution is. Now that I've seen that a couple of times. And what a new one is.
Yeah, did you hear me read the 3 Copernican revolutions laid out by McLuhan? You heard that, right?
Yeah, but what would be, who else would have how would somebody else be talking about that, I guess is my question. Did you think that Rheingold got that from McLuhan?
No, it's a pretty obscure McLuhan idea. And, but who knows, maybe he did. Copernicus, he made humans no longer be the center of the universe. He moved us to a heliocentric world. The sun was the center of the solar system, whereas before that the Earth was, and all the planets rotated around us. Now, Ion is bringing back a bit of the geocentric. He's making the human being the center of the universe, not the sun or the Earth. So the revolution in space and time by Copernicus was repeated by the effects of the newspaper in the period of the Enlightenment and Immanuel Kant, and then the electric age brings in the addiction of pattern recognition. That was the 3rd Copernican revolution. So it means a world landscape shift. So Copernicus is pretty appropriate for naming a world perspective shift. So the new Copernican revolution, Rheingold would have to be talking about virtual reality. I don't know if he would do it correctly. I don't know if it's Copernican. But
yeah, I don't know, because I got one, Rheingold, I read one article, and then he also had a little exercise that he was doing with the laws of media, where he was inviting people to talk about the laws of media in just like a one-page article. It seemed pretty rudimentary, especially compared to what you would do with something like that. So I know he was exposed to McLuhan, but
is he using the Tetrad? Are you saying that he mentions the laws of media in the Tetrad? Okay.
You want me to grab the article pretty quick? You want me to grab this and tell you what it says? I had saved this for another time, but here, let me grab it.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's McLuhanizing mobile media. It's just one page. I can read it if you want. What would Marshall McLuhan, visionary prophet of pre-internet media, say about mobile telephony, texting, the mobile web, and the always-on world of wireless devices? Although a wide variety of answers are possible to this question, I believe what I can cite an exact answer to a slightly different question. What would McLuhan ask about mobile telephony, texting, and the always-on world of wireless devices? The central tenet and crown jewel of McLuhan's theories were his laws of media. The laws of media were not answers, but questions that McLuhan brilliantly applied to the electric media of this area, landline telephones, radio, and broadcast television. To interrogate a new medium, McLuhan asked 4 questions he and his son Eric published in their book, The Laws of Media, The New Science. What does the artifact enhance or intensify to make possible or accelerate? This can be asked concerning a wastebasket, a painting, a steamroller, or a zipper, as well as about a proposition in Euclid's law of physics. It can be asked about any word or phrase in any language. When pushed to the limits of its potential, another complementary action, the new form will tend to reverse what had been its original characteristics. What is the reversal potential of the new form? What recurrence or retrieval of earlier actions and services is brought into play simultaneously by the new form? What older, previously obsolesced ground is brought back and inheres in the new form? In some aspect of a situation is enlarged or enhanced, simultaneously the old condition or unenhanced situation is displaced thereby. What is pushed aside or obsolesced by the new organ? McLuhan was the original master of nonlinearity, reacting to the lockstep sequential thinking enforced by the old medium of printed type by experimenting with books that were discontinuous fluid gestalt of aphorisms and visual images. In that spirit, McLuhan was not advocating answering these questions sequentially, nor in ordering them in a hierarchy of priority. Think of the questions as a kind of mental lens that can be used to switch modes of focus and thus see the whole world of media, people, causes, and effects in a new way, keeping in mind that each question can be seen in a new way if considered in relation to every other question and answer. How might we subject the mobile telephone to McLuhan-esque interrogation? I humbly offer this question to everyone who reads this. Please offer the first idea off the top of your head or the intricately reasoned argument that took you an hour to formulate. McLuhan would want brainstorming, not meticulously nitpicking debate. Please add your thoughts and links as comments if you feel so moved. So he's just inviting people to do this like in a blog, and then he gives his application of the laws of media to this mobile telephone. So he says, I'll start. The mobile telephone enhances the ability of individuals in different locations to communicate and organize activities with other individuals. It enhances planning. I'm stuck in traffic. Collective action. Flash mob at the mall tomorrow. Social solidarity. I love you, honey. Control. You turn that television off and do your homework right now. The reversal potential of the mobile telephone is that the means of liberation is also a tether. At the innocent dawn of mobile devices, the image of a person on a beach conducting business via laptop and mobile phone was an image of liberation. I don't have to be at the office. I can do what I want from the beach. And, of course, by now it has turned into an image of enslavement. I can't even leave the office, even at the beach. I'll take a long leap at the retrieval question and say that in some way the mobile telephone is reviving the oral dimension that McLuhan claims was supplanted by print literacy, which was supplanted by electric literacy of simultaneous image-heavy, quick-changing, multi-mode information. As we walk through image-bombarded Times Square, we spend our time engaged in the oldest human communication medium, the spoken word. What is pushed aside or obsolesced if some aspect of mobile telephony is enlarged? How about the office? Cyber nomads already cluster at Starbucks, migrating to Kinko's if necessary for hard copy, and abandon their offices to sit in Wi-Fi parks on sunny days. Think of each of these attempts at answers as a facet of multifaceted prism. Pick it up, look at the whole picture through the enhancement, reversal, retrieval, or obsolesced facet. Then put that in the prism and pick up another. And then he's just inviting conversation. But I thought that was it's kind of cute. I mean, it's not what you do, certainly, but at least he's trying with McLuhan.
Well, I see Howard Rheingold and the whole Wired magazine gang as part of the Android memes revival. the Android meme was where technology came alive and took on life of its own and left our chemical bodies in the dust. That was hidden ground and really dynamic from 1960 to 1990. Then what's called the Internet was the retrieval of the Android meme after it died in 1990. And so you have this figure of the Android meme, which is the web, World Wide Web. Howard Rheingold got famous with his book on virtual reality, and there's a whole bunch that wrote in on that. I see them as extensions of the Android meme, and not even the original Android meme, just replays of the wholly opposites, McLuhan, Zappa, LaRouche, Thompson, etc., in the 90s. And so therefore his kind of talk about the Tetrad is really limited, bureaucratic, and boring. And he doesn't point out that the Tetrad got absorbed and subsumed by the Android meme, and the Android meme did the Tetrad management, used and reflected the Tetrad managed back to the obsolescent chemical body, and that was called the Pentad management. So yes, I took all those guys as knee-jerk responses within the Android meme and its retrieval, and not very interesting to read. I mean, he's just presenting the Tetrad to someone who never heard of McLuhan, and so it's a nice little introduction, but it doesn't get into the literary and artistic subtlety of McLuhan. He's thinking of what's extended, what's retrieved in the world of work, of offices, and where you end up on the beach or something. He's not looking at what's retrieved in pop culture, what's retrieved in science, what's retrieved in politics. It's all across the world. But these wired guys tend to only think literally of the new environment as what they can see, which is the new wired technologies of the 90s, and they don't see what that's a figure for, and they don't see what the old medium has been forced to adapt to. They're not broad enough, they're not deep enough, and they don't know that McLuhan was not applicable after 1990, that the Android meme retrieved McLuhan and Zappa and all the people I talk about as after images of its own funeral, which is a very profound thought and takes years to explain. As I said to the McLuhan audience, in March 28, 1998 at Lincoln Center, I said, I did a 15-minute talk. That's all you were allowed. And then I said, well, you're going to have to listen to me for the next 25 years because I've just stated the opening sentence. I think I said something like that. Do you remember that, Bert? I said something like that.
Yes.
And I said, you're going to have to listen to me for the next 25 years and what it means, the implication of what I said, because the point I was making, you haven't heard yet. That's what I said.
Well, do you think this essay was... Go ahead.
What?
I just wonder if this... I wish I could read this essay that Frank wrote. I'm just so curious about it.
Yeah, we got to get it. I'd be interested in what he says. I never even knew about it. Would it be on the website, the Zappa? They've got a lot.
I looked because I wanted to read it really bad, and then I just kind of thought, well, maybe. And it's not in a Rheingold book. Actually, it's in a different book that when I went down the rabbit hole on this, I found it. But it's called Creators on Creating, Awakening and Cultivating the Imaginative Mind.
Is this edited by Rheingold?
No, I don't know why. I don't know why I found this. You know how you just go on a tear and all this stuff comes into your...
What's it called?
It's called Creators on Creating. I can send you a link. I'm sitting right at my computer if you want.
Oh, okay.
And
I get it.
And it's called All About the Music by Frank Zappa.
Okay. Creators on Creating, Awakening, Cultivating the Imaginative. Now, let's see. 1997. Introduction to Frank Barron. Creative process. You can look inside. Let's see.
I tried that.
Contributors. Doesn't work? Like I can't.
Well, I mean, you can't go to a specific page. They're not going to let you. You can't navigate around where you want to.
Yeah, but let's see what you can see. Zappa, where is Zappa's title? Frank Zappa.
He's on page 195, essay number 33, Frank Zappa, All About Music.
Okay, so let's see what happens. So you've gone through this, clicked through, and you didn't find Frank.
No, I was even hoping Ion would help me if it said surprise me, and I would get to that page.
Right, it has 167. So let's just go back and see who's in it. It's pretty interesting what they've got. So it's not just our time. They have Henry Miller, Fellini, the film director, Pamela Travers, I don't know her, Anna Halperin, I think she was a dance instructor. A.E. Houseman was a poet. Rilke was a poet in the 20s or so. Kathy Johnson, I don't know her. Richard Feynman is a famous pre-Jack Sephardi physicist. J.G. Bennett was a Gurdjieff follower. W.B. Yeats, he's on my chart. Annie Dillard, she was a novelist. Mary Shelley, the one who wrote Frankenstein. Carl Jung, Italo Calvino, he wrote a Menippean satire that McLuhan mentioned. Mikhail Foucault, a structuralist, post-structuralist. Marion Milner, I don't know that. Virginia Woolf, born the same year as James Joyce, competed with James Joyce. Mabel Dodge Lewin, I think she was the head of Bohemia in the Greenwich Village and ended up down in Taos, New Mexico. It's great that they brought in Zappa. And then Mabel Dodge, Morris Sendak, I've heard of him, I don't know. Maya Angelou was Gerd Stern, my friend Gerd Stern's lover in the early 50s. Ingmar Bergman, the filmmaker. Sidney Bechet, the early jazz guy. Tony Kushner did that play. The Angels, you remember that? That play in the 80s, big Broadway thing, something about the Angels, about AIDS. Irving Oil, I don't know that.
Angels in America.
Right. N. Scott Mummaday, I don't know that. Brian Eno, we know him. And then David Ogilvy, he was a big, important advertising executive. And somebody asked him his opinion of McLuhan, who did a lot of writing on advertising, what he thought of McLuhan for a book on McLuhan. And he said, I hardly know the guy, and I'm sure he didn't know what he was talking about. It was a total put-down of McLuhan. So that's Ogilvy. Leonardo da Vinci, Tchaikovsky, Muriel Rukeyser, forget who that was. Maybe she's a critic. I can't remember. Igor Stravinsky, Frank Zappa, Eugen Irigo, something about Zen. They have that title. That area is called The Dedication to Mastery. The Courage to Go Naked. Isadora Duncan, 1920s dancer. Karen Finley, a postmodern artist of the 80s and 90s, I guess. Laurence Olivier, the famous actor. Matt Callahan, I don't know him. Ursula Le Guin may have been, I knew about her in the 60s. She was a science fiction writer, and she liked McLuhan. She knew McLuhan. Maybe even lived in Toronto. So that's the punchline. We come back to McLuhan again. So, yeah, definitely have to look that up. See what Frank wrote.
Well, the book you can get for a penny, and then the shipping is $3.99.
Oh yeah, no, I'm always buying books, so we'll get that. Now here's
get it and then photocopy the essay. We can all read it. I don't want to get a book for a 3-page essay because I don't like books.
Right.
Don't just throw the book away. I just want the essay.
So. I think we got half an hour.
But what do you think Frank would have said, Bob? Like, I was listening to everything that you were saying and how he's a polymath and all of his various... Like, where do you think Frank got his inspiration? Do you believe in inspiration? What do you think inspiration is?
I think he'd use the cliched archetype process that McLuhan said. Takes the ordinary and tries to make it extraordinary. He looks for the unnoticed, the hidden ground, the forgotten, not trying to make beauty, but trying to stimulate awareness of things that are not noticed by the numbed somnambulist. It might begin that way, but I have no idea. That's why I'm interested, because he could be manipulative about it. He could say he was not interested in creativity. It's a nom de plume for the stupid. What's it? McLuhan, Harley Parker, I think, said, "Taste is the last refuge of the witless." That's a kind of statement that Frank would like, and it's got to say something like that. Frank was not a snob about genius, not a snob about creativity.
What do you mean by that? He thought anybody could do it? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. In that movie, you can see online, Picnic in Space, McLuhan says the idea of genius comes in the 19th century, and it's a misnomer and should not be used. Now, this is total subgenius talk. You know, we study the effects of the illusion of genius, and Frank would he would see the concept of genius was culturally conditioned. It was the last gasp of the literate individual ego before the swamp of the electric age, which would make the creative team, take over from the solitary genius or artist. So it's a phase of the Gutenberg galaxy, the idea of genius.
Okay, well, that's interesting.
Let me just say this. He defines in Picnic in Space, he just says genius is just somebody who happens to notice something that other people didn't notice. Just noticing something that others missed.
Okay, well, that's interesting to me, too, because I've been fascinated lately by the eugenics movement. Been watching a lot of documentaries on that, because there was a school here in Lynchburg where I lived, one of the schools for the feeble-minded, where they were mass sterilizing people. It was like a colony where they would send all the feeble-minded people. And there's not a lot of history available on it because people want to cover it up, because Hitler got many of his ideas for the gas chambers from America, from Lynchburg, from our feeble-minded colonies. And I did not know that, and I find that fascinating. And so evidently those IQ tests were developed to determine whether people needed to be put in these colonies. So it's interesting that you're talking about genius as the last gasp of, Gutenberginess. And I've been thinking about the IQ test as a way to, it was Darwin's nephew who started this, the eugenics movement, because Darwin was saying that it was survival of the fittest and let nature select, and then his nephew came along and said, well, why don't we help it along? So we'll just round up all these dumbasses and gas them. And that's why IQ tests were developed. And there was no talk of genius before we had a 160 IQ to be the cutoff for that.
Yep.
So I just find it interesting. I don't really have a conclusion. It's just kind of fitting with a lot of things that I'm thinking about lately.
Right. And Zappa listed as his favorite movie was the movie called Freaks from the 30s, maybe?
Yeah, Google Gobble, Google Gobble. I love that movie. One of Us. Yeah. That movie's on YouTube, the whole thing.
Right. So you know what that is. So he saw aberration or mutants as the key to creativity, and many of them wouldn't look like geniuses, traditional geniuses. They were oddballs, saw things differently, noticed other things that people didn't notice. So here's the deal. We have a contribution by Jim McDougall, and we can start it and finish next, not Jim McDougall, Jim McDonough. And I'm going to read it, but it's long. And are you guys able to stay here another hour and 22 minutes, or are you going to drop off?
I'd love to. I'm not going to drop off.
Okay.
That's good.
So we can end at 2 o'clock my time, and then I get a 2-hour break. So
This is so fun. I never get to do this in the morning with you.
Yeah,
I love it.
It's a luxury. It's a luxury.
It's a luxury. I'm luxuriating.
But what you're bringing up about the racist and cultural limited imperialism of education and intelligence tests, that's a big topic. And definitely Frank countered that instinctively by celebrating what appeared to be stupid music in the composer's world, bringing in oddballs, and his movie, Baby Snakes, the subtitle is a movie about people who are not normal. So the freaks theme always was there. But if you start to become political about it, you'll get bogged down in what, Ion warns us, don't get too involved with trying to change the world. It isn't broken. So you're going to free the marginalized and do this or that.
So the bottom line is, before we move on to this thing, I don't need to read any Rheingold. I mean, it was interesting to look at, whatever, but I think he seems like he's really full of himself. Yeah, okay, all right.
But as I was saying, the bias, so you don't want to end up making a political program out of, saving the geniuses, saving the marginalized, because humans will always mutate from whatever the norm is. So if you create a new norm, okay, we're going to save the freaks, the mutants, that'll become a norm, and then there'll have to be a different kind of freak in response to that. So it's tricky criticizing the intelligence tests or making a profession to change it, alter it. It's an invasion of people's privacy. People have the right to be stupid and to have lousy lives, or to be eccentric and get marginalized. I've learned from Ion that people are pretty perverse. They'll do anything to be different. And you got to remember that if you're a doctor, that people are going to take your new solution, whatever medicine you've got for them, and eventually they'll make it that it causes problems. Because the deeper issue in little man is they're screwed up and they don't want to ascend. They don't want to get better. They want to stay in pain. And that's a major lesson for the social democrats, so to speak, or any do-gooder, from religion to the Red Cross. It always becomes a disservice, an institution.
Yeah. Well, and just one more comment, and then we can drop that. That's exactly what I was thinking, because when you watch these documentaries and listen to the social workers of the time talking about all the reasons why they need to sterilize these feeble-minded people, it really highlights and magnifies how, I'm going to say, disgusting those conversations are. When you're just talking about, maybe this little 13-year-old girl who was raped by her uncle now for the 4th time should have an abortion. That's a little easier to swallow than maybe we should remove this little 10-year-old girl's uterus because she has the potential to be raped by her uncle and get pregnant and have an unwanted pregnancy. When you're talking about eugenics, some of the other conversations that don't seem as severe that social workers have today, if you applied it to eugenics, it really highlights how disgusting it is that some people think that they know what's better, what's the best thing for somebody. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, and that was Zappa's attitude. He was always looking out for the do-gooders or the people who were stuffed up with pride that they were trying to help people. You're citing a Zappa characteristic there by your opinion. Your
well, maybe I need to get more into Frank, because I think I probably really like him.
This is the point. That's the only education left is what I offer. That's 10 holy offices and then Ion. But there's nothing else that will challenge your mind than what I'm offering. Nothing. You should read LaRouche. LaRouche is incredible to read. And each one of them is not necessarily the truth. There's no truth under Android meme conditions. It's just pattern recognition. And then there's the addiction to pattern recognition. So, McLuhan, Zappa, LaRouche, Croker, me, Phineas Wake, we don't exclude the untruth.
Both and.
Yeah, both and, yeah.
Both and.
Information. Communication is obsolete. That's why you have nothing but hyper communication and everybody trying to serve somebody. Trying to offer a service. You know, life coaching is the popular expression of it.
Yeah.
And, you know, and Einstein's therapists are the rapist. So that's a very radical idea. That is the new political or spiritual correctness, to violate people's sense of, well, I've got to go out there and help people, because more and more people rely on that meme. It's the last thing they can come up with for their image of remaining civilized. To satirize that, to poke sharp things into that is you're risking losing all your friends when you do that.
Yeah.
Well, yes. You mean to satirize that, or to try to be a life coach?
No, to put down being a life coach. Ion is always against life coaching.
Well, that's basically what my novel is about. It's a Manifian satire about that whole thing. So, here I go.
Yeah, and you know, Marion Williamson is your image of that, and I'm the image of the anti-environment to that, and in that I was an amateur until Ion showed up, and then he completed my expertise on the matter.
Right.
Now I can actually help people and not mean it. I can even satirize my own self and actually pretend to help people, actually help them with our products. So we contradict whatever movement whatever norm is being formed, we'll contradict it.
Interesting.
Not to better things, just to see if somebody gets mad at the pattern. You know, raise it up on the flagpole, see who salutes. And often saluting is objecting. Like all those guys on the chat line that just yell and scream among themselves, you know. They're all ignoring the flag or being seduced by the flag. I don't know which.
I don't get what you just said. What did you just say, Bob? What did you just say?
I said that the guys on the chat. Yeah, the Ronins, yes. There's fights break out all the time, and we're presenting awesome Ion stuff, and they're either trying to be Manifian satirists and ignore the Iondom beneficence and abundance, or they're lost in their discomfort at the fact that I out-Manifianize whatever they're going to attempt. Look, they got a guy posting on there, Hermann Hitler. Hermann Hitler's now on there.
Oh, his name is Hermann Hitler?
Yeah.
Pine Tree Tickle, Pernicious Parody,
Yeah. Erasmus Holidays, Pernicious Parody. What's something about Bob? Let's see, did I see the word? Nah, who cares? They're trying to communicate or satirize the act of communication, but they're still trying to communicate. I mean, we have the greatest agenda or statement of purpose. We're not here to help anybody. We don't care whether you feel good or not. We're not here for that. We're just here for the ascending. Well, what the fuck is that? You know, what is the ascending? You've heard that, right?
We're not here to help anyone. It's not here for your pleasure. It's not here for your enjoyment. It's not here.
And then it cancels everything and it says we're here just for the ascending. Now, what is the ascending, you know? If you don't have some of those qualities, what are you? Good. So that's good. You got that. Yeah. I don't need to play it.
Yeah, I love that. You know, before you do this last thing, too, this is what's super cool, too, is that when I was looking at that Rheingold book, and I actually had it in my cart, and I was like, well, $4, let me just, not the one with the Frank essay in it, but this one on higher creativity. Everything that I would have wanted that book for, I just got through this conversation.
Yes. Is that right now? Through us?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right now.
Yeah.
Yep. So glad I'm luxuriating in this morning. Okay, play your thing or read your thing. You want to do your thing? Your next 2 minutes?
No, here's the statement. I think I found it. Let's just put this into the Zappa world. I don't think the Zappa people know this. Here's what Frank was saying. This is Frank's project, object, conceptual continuity. This is what he was all about. What ion, the main voice you hear. Hey, this product is only for ascending people. Not for unhealthy people, not people who are sick, not people who got all these
problems. We're not here to cure anything. We're not here to help anything. We're not trying to do anything. We're not trying to make you happy. We're not trying to prove your happiness. We're not trying to see that you're whether or not you're happy. We're not here that this product was not created for your benefit, for your pleasure, or for your enjoyable delightment. It's not for that. It's only for the ascending.
No, that's impossible. We're not here to make you feel better, anything positive. Well, what are we here for? But here we are going to cause the biggest beneficial environmental change in the history of humanity, and we're denying it all the way to the bank, or to the non-bank, or to the gold depository, or Fort Knox, or something, and or to the next payday show. We're denying it all the way to the next payday show. But that is incredible to say that we don't care if you get any better from us. It's the ultimate erasing of yourself. Where you'll never pin us down. If you start thinking we're here to be satirize everything, we'll stop satirizing and become nice, honest people. You know what I mean? We'll just switch on you. We're Rumpelstiltskins. But that is the most radical statement I think I've ever heard. By three people who are obviously helping people. They're celebrating. No, we're not here to help you. That's what Howard Rheingold doesn't tell you. But we have to see if Frank tells us when we read his thing on creativity.
I'm still here. I just had to let my chickens out.
Oh, okay. Well, what's interesting is that McLuhan said he'd figured out the identity of the creative process. Zappa satirized the creative process, but was very creative in doing it. McLuhan was pretty sociologically accurate in satirizing the creative process. Thompson was very concerned with by his time it was called cognitive studies, I think. And then Coker is definitely talking about the creative process of the android meme. And then I'm showing the creative process with the phrase stages of apprehension, and I'm showing the most comprehensive view of the creative process, which is what Ian's all about. And he's always changing, upsetting your understandings of what creativity is. So that's the key question in the 20th century is what is the creative process? McLuhan said, creativity is obsolete. There's so much creativity going on, it's a cliche. We're interested, it must be something else. This is boring, too much creativity. And yet you get other people saying, no, the millions of people are zombies and hadn't had a creative thought in 50 years. So it's a complex tetradic, squared into pentadic, non-communication. Creativity is non-communication. There's the best definition. I just came up with it. Chicken lover.
Yeah. Can you hear him crowing?
Yeah,
we can hear him.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob,
I'm going to go in a second. Okay.
Look at this. The next person calls himself Down with Her Men, and they chant, end the eradication. End the eradication. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Can you explain real quick, or if you can't, how Frank obsolesces Finnegan's Wake? I found that interesting.
Because it's not a book. He has the Finnegan. It's multi-layered. All the media are intended to be in there. It's Finnegan's Wake. replay of Phineas Wake, but it is pure sound, and Phineas Wake cannot be sound. Now, Joyce writes as if sound is an important part of the book,
right.
But and he includes all media, and so does Frank. They're very similar, but the fact that Frank he says music is the best. It's pretty hard to beat great music. It's a lot more fun than reading a book. Though reading can be fun and interesting and necessary because you want to get away from the sound hypnosis. But it's just that to get up stage and do what Frank does, I think that's way better than a book, or hugely awesome and more relevant to our time than a book. So I would say Phineas Wake predicted Zappa and McLuhan, and indirectly predicted Bob and Connie. But it had to go through the Frank, McLuhan, and other holy offices. So it's just, I'm not going to be a POB, a print-oriented bastard, stuck in the book. Frank, I mean, it's just a great, Frank heals cancer. I don't think Phineas Wake heals cancer. How about that? That's my thing.
Yeah, I see. Because, what you just said, it's not in print, but then I just recall all the different moods from the music you just played in the set before we started the Zappa Hour. It was really, it covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
Within those 20 minutes that you
productive than distorting all the facts to make me look good. And so I had to say Frank was more important than Phineas Wake. That's all I was doing, was sheer normal American businessman tactics. I'm an American businessman, Kate.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to what Jim McDonough sent us. You can actually, there's a video for it, but it's interesting to read the transcript. So he begins, his first item he sends me is, three people remember Frank Zappa's 1963 St. Mary's concert. So the same year that he was on Steve Allen playing the bicycle, I don't know what it cost him, but he managed to organize a composer's symphony concert at a university college in Los Angeles. So it says, Jim highlights this. Frank Zappa, in an interview from the 1992 Tribute magazine, Zappa special issue on Zappa, keyboard and guitar player, seems to be the title of the magazine. So Frank says, actually, the first time I had any of it, in brackets, his serious music performed, was in 1962, then in brackets 6. So SIC, meaning that's what he said, but he might have had it wrong, which should be 63. I spent $300 and got together a college orchestra, and I put on this little concert. Maybe less than 100 people showed up for it, but the thing was actually taped and broadcast by KPFK, which is a station I later would be on it 30 years later. In brackets, by the time I graduated from high school in 1958, I still hadn't written any rock and roll songs, although I had a little rock and roll band in my senior year. I didn't write any rock and roll stuff until I was in my 20s. All the music writing that I was doing was either chamber music or orchestral, and none of it ever got played until this concert at Mount St. Mary's, unquote. Then Rip Sense, a Los Angeles music critic, Rip Sense, on the liner notes of one of Zappa's releases called The Lost Episodes, which is a collection of pre-Freak-Out, late 50s, early 60s stuff, some of it in his studio Z in Cucamonga. Quote, Rip Sense says, it took place, meaning this concert, it took place in 1963 at, of all the pastoral places, lovely Mount St. Mary's College, a private Catholic institution perched in the lush Santa Monica Mountains above West Los Angeles. The program included a piece called Opus 5, aleatoric works that required some improvisation, a piece for orchestra and taped electronic music with accompanying visuals in the form of Frank Zappa's own experimental 8mm films. So he's mixing his media. Now, there's this guy named Carlos Hagen he's the host of this KPFK radio show, looking back at the details of this concert. So he says, quote, the year was, I assume he says this on the radio show, the year was 1963. I was a newcomer in Los Angeles, and I was avidly looking for, feeling, sensing the avant-garde in Los Angeles. I was also producing my very first programs for KPFK, the Pacifica Foundation outlet in Los Angeles. Very soon I realized the avant-garde was not to be found along the famed La Cienega Boulevard or the sadly, rapidly decaying beat scene in Venice, but mostly was to be found in obscure, unexpected places. And that is how I was attracted to the 5th Annual Contemporary Musical Symposium held in the spring of 1963 at a small but very open-minded Catholic liberal college of West Los Angeles. First concert. And he says, and that was virtually the only place in Los Angeles that opened its doors to Frank Zappa and his novel musical and visual experiments of, you might call, experimental, aleatory, electronic visual music. So that's footnote 1, or item 1. Item 2. It's a listing of his radio show. Presents the experimental music of Frank Zappa on Sunday, May 19th, 1963, 8:30 p.m. Wait a minute. What is this? Okay. No, it is. It is the radio show. The experimental music of Frank Zappa, Sunday, May 19th, 1963, 8:30 p.m. Little Theater, Mount St. Mary's College, KPFK FM, with the Pomona Valley Symphony Orchestra. The actual program is presently on YouTube. So I don't understand what he's mixing up. He's mixing his radio show in with the actual concert. I'm not sure what's going on here. He's got KPFK listed, as well as the coordinates for the actual performance. So then it outlines the radio show. We don't need to go through that. Now comes the next part. Opening comments. I guess we'll read this. Opening comments by Carlos Hagen, and Jim has made a summary. Begins expressions of admiration of Zappa, describes the Los Angeles music scene in 1963, more about Carlos Hagen and KPFK in 1963 and how he finally got the station to play Zappa's concert on the air. Zappa biographical information explaining his early musical evolution. More Frank Zappa history from Freakout album to and including Mother's Invention live concerts. Frank Zappa's acerbic criticism of American society is displayed in Brown Shoes Don't Make It. Carlos Hagen introduces the 1963 Frank Zappa concert, and he has a quote from Zappa and says, Zappa, and I guess this is what he was saying at the concert. Now, the way this is supposed to work is the musicians are instructed to interpret what they see on the screen in this manner. They draw an equivalent of sight on the screen, and they're to produce their own musical equivalent of that particular sight. Got that? That's all you have to do. Apparently there's laughter in the audience and in the orchestra. Could we have the lights down? We don't need these. The tempo is free. Can we go? Can these go off? And there's chatter and laughter. I'm sorry for the delay, of course. In turning off the lights on the stage, we also turned off the projector. Much laughter. There you go. You may continue to play. So a little bunch of glitches at the beginning. So then it says, Piece 2 of visual music. It's called Visual Music, 1957 for Jazz Ensemble and 16mm projector. Zappa says, quote, for those of you who can see the screen, I'm sure it's kind of difficult for some of you that the angles was made partly by photographing images, the camera. I did this with a 8mm Brownie movie camera. I went running around in my backyard like a maniac holding my camera like this, and I turned it on and turned around like this, and the spring in my camera runs slower than it should. It speeds up the images anyway. Then you run the camera around in circles like that. You get everything just swirling by. So you get all these colors, and you don't really get images of that, of what you're doing. You just get an action, a kind of, from what you're shooting. You just get an action, kind of, from what you're shooting. So that's kinetic, hyperkinetic space he's bringing in. And he says, This was taken and blown up to 16 millimeter in a lab. And by doing that, you add a lot of grain to the picture, and you also lose some of your color contrast. Then I took some 16 millimeter leader, and leader is stuff like this, I guess shows it. Sometimes white, you dip it in a hypo solution, it becomes clear, and this still has emulsion on it, which I scraped and mixed with different colors of paint and nail polish and anything I could get my hands on to connect these colors on there. Some of it was done with brush, some with pen, some with pieces of wood, some with a hairbrush, and I had no idea what it was going to look like while I was doing it, because when you get something this big and you're painting it on a film, it bears really very little relation to what it's going to look like when it's going to go up in that large, when it's going to go up that large onto a screen. You can't really tell what the reaction is going to be. So the whole thing, the film, is more or less improvised. And it was put together in a random fashion, just trying to keep the most interesting parts of what I had shot and what I had painted, and the only thing that I've cut out of this is sort of dead spots and the black leader. The quiet passages that were in the film I inserted there as spacers to tone down the group while they're performing. They're in to rehearse. That's not actual film that was wasted. Not sure what that means. The next piece we're going to perform is a set of variables. One for any 5 instruments will be a group of piano pieces taken from the Opus 5 for full orchestra. It's actually a piece for, in this case, the way it's being performed tonight will be with 3 orchestral groups, a tape recorder, and the piano. This is the piano part from that composition. It tends to get buried somewhat when the rest of the orchestra plays. The pianist will perform these sounds like, well, Jim writes sounds like. It sounds like the word is stridents, S-T-R-I-D-E-N-T-S. The pianist will perform these stridents in any order it feels necessary and will improvise freely. So that's that one. So quite a complex explaining of his process, process analysis. It's much like the way Finnegan's Wake is written. On the piano pieces from Opus 5, Frank says, the next piece we're going to perform will be Collage 1 for a string group, accompanied with woodwind. Let me explain to you a little bit about what happened in the last piece while the musicians are coming up here. Excuse me, would you hand me the part that sounds like, would you hand me the part to G fragment? Yes, 2 sheets of paper. Good. 9 fragments, which are not serial. Not 12-tone. They're just sound studies from the musical studies. And this is basic kind of fun, which most of this music is built. This is basic kind of fun, which most of this music is built. The collage, which you're about to hear, it's called a collage because it's a collage. It's like a collage in terms of art. Things are overlaid like pieces of paper or pieces of music. In this case, the collage is built from fragments of different canons, if you follow me. I've constructed a number of small canons, broke them up into pieces, laid them one on top of the other, and scored them for a strange something. I can't make out the word. With that, Bert, he's explaining every piece elaborately before he plays it.
Great detail.
Normally that's not done. Yeah, great detail. Frank Zappa, okay, then the next thing, collage number 1 for stringed instruments. Zappa says, now, before we take a brief intermission, I'd like to play you part of the electronic tape which will be integrated in the Opus 5 for the orchestral group. Let me attach it to this speaker. Elements that are going to make up the Opus 5 before you actually hear it. I hope thereby it'll be easier for you to understand exactly what is taking place when the Opus 5 is played. Before I go any further, I'll tell you what's on this tape and how to do it yourself if you care to. The sounds that you will hear are produced by actual musical instruments. The only thing that makes this different than any other kind of music you'll hear is the fact that the instruments that are being played by people who don't know how to play those instruments. For instance, you'll hear clarinet on this tape recording, which is played by my wife, who does not play clarinet. And you'll also hear banjo music played by another fellow who doesn't know how to play a banjo. These things were then subjected to electronic alterations. For instance, they are pumped through echo chambers. They are reverberated. They were run through a tremolo device, which sends a tone of low cycle, which modulates the rest of what's happening on the tape. After all these modifications were completed to the original instrument sound, the tape was then cut up in random order. We just chopped it up, stuck it back together again any way that the pieces happen to fall together. So it's totally improvised. Now I'll play you a piece of the tape. So he's doing the William Burroughs' cut-up method. And much like Frank's Joyce's Finnegan's Wake. The next item, 2 fragments of the prepared tape to be used in Opus 5. Zappa says, the instruments that you're hearing on this part of the tape are xylophone, marimba, banjo, bassoon, clarinet, violin, bongo drum, and there's a flute someplace. What do you think of that, guys? I mean, geez. Pretty big operation for a 22. He's 22, you know, when this is happening.
Yeah.
He's not 23 or 21. He's 22. Because he's born in 1940, so he would be 22 in 1962, and now he's going through his year of 22 until he gets to December of 63, and he'll become 23. So it's pretty good, eh?
And like doing all that, having to do the physical stuff. Now people can just like apply stuff with a computer. That was tedious. In addition.
Yes. Yeah, a dog can do it.
Showing
nowadays.
he's a composer.
A cat.
Yep.
What'd you say,
Frank
Bert?
is showing Frank is showing at 22 that he's a composer, but that's so much detail outlined.
Yeah, and I've never heard this. It's pretty good find what Jim found here. These details, and it's good to read it because then when you probably when you play it you can't hear it all, and so it's good to have an idea of what he's talking about. But geez, this celebration. This is a celebration of making. He's celebrating making, not matching. He's not even encouraging matching. He's re-edit, re-improvise. He's predicting the anarchy of our modern society. Okay. So this next part, 2 fragments of the prepared tape to be used in Opus 5. He says all of this recording was produced on a small Webcore tape recorder. There's a Captain Beefheart song in the late 60s. He's going, Webcore, Webcore. He's chanting the company's name for this tape recorder. All of this recording was produced on a small Webcore tape recorder, which I rented from a store downtown for $2.50. And many of you might rent yourself a small tape recorder and try this too in your own home. This is what the wind conductor is reading from. These pages spread around here are fragments that the musicians have copied onto their parts. Now he's going to give them signals telling them which of these fragments to play. And these schematics show him in which order they are to be played this time. The piece is flexible. You can play it any way you want. We've imposed a certain amount of order on it for this performance only. The blue sections on his schematic tells him that he is to be silent for a certain length of time. The red areas tell him that he is to allow his players to improvise. The brass conductor has a similar chart which he goes by. And I go by the same thing for the strings. I'm conducting the tape recorder, the strings, and the piano, and Barry is conducting the woodwinds. And what's your name? And Pete says, Pete. Pete is conducting the brass. And in the audience there's some chuckling and mumbling. And then Frank goes, well, right on. Now, never heard the word right on in 1963, or right on. But it's interesting, he says Barry. And on Lumpy Gravy at one point some voice says, Barry, this should be a dynamite show. Actually, I think it's at the beginning of We're Only for the Money, an album made at the same time as Lumpy Gravy. So there's where Barry is. He was a guy doing the woodwinds, conducting the woodwinds on May 19th, 1963. An obscure fact, never to be forgotten now that I know it. Everybody will learn this fact. Barry. Okay, are you still with me, guys?
Yes.
Right. Next item.
I am too, but I have you on mute. I won't hang up till you say goodbye.
Right. Opus 5 for piano, tape recorder, and multiple orchestras. Multiple orchestras. Transcriber's note. As Opus 5 is winding down, like Jim transcribed this whole thing. He transcribed the whole video audio. As Opus 5 is winding down, some audience snickering, giggling, and laughter is audible from around the 50-minute mark onward. Frank seems to have a good sense of the mood in the room and brings Opus 5 to an end with the following words. Quote, the next piece that we're going to play, audience erupts into huge laughter and applause for about 20 seconds. There may even be a bravo heard. So I guess they knew it was the end, but he says the next piece he's going to carry on. The next piece that we're going to play, then after they all laugh, he says, maybe I should tell you what we're doing. audience laughter. When we were rehearsing this piece, the Opus 5, I gave all the instrumentalists instructions to devise many different sounds on their instruments. You see, a lot of the piece was improvised, audience laughter. And I asked them to find different kind of sounds that they could make on their instruments, and some of them really came up with some nice ideas. More sporadic audience laughter. Then he says, the signals that we were giving, I'll explain to you very simply. This means free improvisation. This, he must have been showing something, his signal. There's your hand signals for the blind. This means free improvisation, and finger signals told the performers which of the fragments they were to play at any given moment. Anything else that we were doing while we were gyrating around here is all meant to convey some kind of meaning. Maybe they just halfway guessed what we meant, in which some audience laughs, in which to make a different kind of, then it's knocked out. Now, a female audience member asks, your Opus 5 moved me profoundly, but not in any rational way. It reminded me, sounds like sometime I had hysterics. Reminded her of somebody having hysterics. Audience laughs. I don't mean this is a bad thing to say at all. I think maybe this is what you're after. You want to be so far out that you're completely detached, or what? She's asking, you want to be so far out that you're completely detached, or what? Frank Zappa says, no, I'm not trying to be far out, and I'm not trying to be hysterical. It's in a way, it's quite a purely natural thing on the Opus 5, even though it may have sounded comical to a few of you. I see we got a nice little laugh at the end of the piece, but the fact is that there's quite a bit of thought going, pulling that piece together, and it took me a long time to figure out how to make it as loose as it sounds. And that was the intention all along, to make it sound that way, not to make it sound hysterical, because that's only your interpretation. Maybe somebody else is going to agree, but the woman says, you're accusing me of being facetious, and I'm quite serious. Zappa says, yeah, I'm not accusing you of being facetious. You may have felt that induced a certain amount of hysteria in you. But to me, when I hear that, the only thing that I can say is, that's the way I've always wanted music to sound. And there's much audience laughter and followed by applause. Okay, next. We're going to see. I think a lot of this transcription is questions and answer with Frank from the audience. Okay, just a second. Okay, male audience member says, I'm not being facetious, but and then there's audience laughter. Frank Zappa says, nobody is facetious. That's okay. Nobody's facetious. A man sounds like he says, we're all very sober, but I'd like to know what your definition of music is. Frank says, music is any organized pattern of sounds. And then the man says, but this is not. You, by your own admission, you said that the rhythms are supposed to be chaotic. Frank says, yeah. Man says, in the answer to one question, Frank says, yeah. In the answer to the question about improvisation, you said that the chords are supposed to be chaotic. So this is not organized. Frank says, oh, how can you say that? If the conductor is conducting from a chart, which is a certain type of organization, if they're playing from parts, which are a certain type of organization, and if the improvisations are allowed at certain periods specified on a schematic diagram, is that not organization? And the man says, well, where then is the structure? I mean, you've been asked several times what the structure is, and you get my question? Well, no, I haven't been asked several times. Dr. Duran asked me one time what was the structure of the last piece that was played, the one in standard notation. Do I have to tell you that's a sonata allegro? I mean, what difference does it make? It's got a shape to it. It's got a diagram that tells them when to play and when to be quiet and when to improvise. That's a structure. And it doesn't have to be something that's been hanging around for 500 or 600 years. Audience applauds. So Frank ends up arguing, chewing out people.
And he's 22 years old.
Ion. Aleatoric music. That's Aleatoric. Aleatoric music, in which the general structure, the plan, the details are left up to the performers to some extent, up to the conductor. someone like people like John Cage, where they might be 24 players and 12 radios, 2 players to a radio, and the conductor points to these various people, and they put on a dialed knob where they go and change stations as the conductor wishes. And of course, this music by John Cage is much more difficult to comprehend than the music that you've heard, because it's dependent upon what radio programs are being played at that particular time. This guy, Dr. Duran, gets a lot of audience laughter at that. Frank goes, yeah. Then Dr. Duran says, so in case any of you think this is too wild, well, John Cage is much wilder, and this would be a kind of introduction to this gentleman. Now, there it is, the teacher always outdoing the student, or Zappa, Teacher knows more than Frank. And Frank, you're just redoing John Cage. Zappa says, yes, I think you should all go to a John Cage concert, and then you'll come back to the next one I have, and you'll like it. You go to a John Cage concert and come back, you'll like Frank's. The audience laughs. A male audience member says, in what regard do you consider what we would call the grand masters of the passive music? Bach, Brahms, Beethoven, Schubert, and then Jim writes Schoenberg. He doesn't know if Schoenberg is said or not. He has a question mark. So Frank says, I know absolutely nothing about any composers before the 20th century. I have a very unusual type of musical background. It's practically nil. There's much laughter at that. I taught myself what I know, whatever that is, about music, and my own personal taste in what I listen to. And my own personal taste in what I listen to does not include very much tonal music of that type. But I'll tell you what I do like. I am a great fan of rhythm and blues, and I like rock and roll, and I like folk music. But I don't like Schubert, and I don't like Brahms, and I don't like things like that. I don't like Beethoven a whole lot. Then there's laughter in the audience. The first long-playing album that I bought was the complete works of Edgar Varese, and I got that when I was about 14 years old. And that's what I grew up with musically. I don't even have a record player. I didn't even have a record player before that. And I wasn't listening to the radio, so you might say that I kind of started on the wrong foot. But that's the answer to his question. Anybody? Next question. Anybody? Yes? So what do you think of that, Bert? The guy is like entered the composing world, and he's not qualified in any way to be part of it. He makes a point and say, I like rock and roll and rhythm and blues. So there's a bit of a Manipian satire going on here, Katie.
At 22. That's amazing.
Yeah. And he's been on TV. He was on TV a month or two before this. You remember?
Right,
yeah, Stevie Allen says.
Steve Allen.
This is just Steve Allen. He says, this is just a clever way you just did all this so you could get on TV. He accuses him of charlatan, conning people. At 22. All right, so where are we at here? Page 7. I think we did that. Yeah.
This is way better than that essay, I'm sure. Here I was looking for how Frank gets his inspiration, and look at this that you're giving me. I don't need that stupid 3-page essay out of that stupid book. Read on.
That's right, Katie. You could throw everything out, all the culture in the world, but as long as you get Dobbstown, you're going to be cultured. See?
Yeah.
That's it.
I'm luxuriating in the culture. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. We appreciate your enthusiasm. All right. So then another male audience member says, I would like a little more clarity. Like these people, 1963, they haven't had much experience of this John Cage stuff. They're totally flummoxed by this experience they've had, So they're really trying to find out, what do we call this? Are you Rumpelstiltskin? Or what's your name? You know Bob Dobbs? You're an agent of Bob. You're Ophanel. Ophanel number 5, not Opus number 5. It should be Ophanel. And the way we have Ion talk about Ophanel, he's kind of lurking in the background of every fucking scene in the last 3,000 years.
Yeah.
That's me. I'm lurking behind Frank. I'm Frank's Ophanel. He's having a private conversation with me where I tell him some secrets. So this male audience member says, I would like a little more clarification for myself on your improvisation that you did before the last. I think we all think of improvisation in terms of the jazz field, where there's a set chord progression or whatever, and maybe that's what Jim writes. Where there is this jazz, I think we all think of improvisation in terms of the jazz field, where there's a set chord progression or something. And could you explain a little more about your improvisation? Frank says, how they improvise? He thinks he's asking about they improvise. The man says, yes. Well, it's very simple. They're just turned completely free. So I guess the guy is asking Frank how he taught or created the orchestra members to improvise, because he starts talking about them. He says, very simple. They're just turned completely free. The man says, no. He says, no lead of any sort. The lead. And then Frank says, well, during the improvisation, the actual improvisation sections, when they aren't reading anything at all, when they aren't reading anything at all, they're just instructed to go. The guy goes, go? And Frank says, yeah, just turn themselves completely free and try and avoid tonal passages was the only thing that I said to them during the rehearsal. And I think they pretty well did that. The audience snickers. The man says, now, let's say that this number that you're going to do it again. Zappa says, yes. And you want it to come out approximately the same way it did tonight. What instructions would you give the group? Frank says, well, I may want it to come out approximately the same way it did tonight, but I don't see really how I could. Because in the first place, it's kind of foolish. A foolish idea, because after how I explained to you how the parts were, you just can't match the rhythms. And you can't duplicate the improvisations, and you can't duplicate the spontaneity that you get. The man says, well, I'm thinking of, in the line of jazz, of course, improvisation is a wonderful thing. Frank goes, I like it. The audience snickers. I guess he goes deadpan, I like it. Okay, we're coming up to part 9. Actually, it's the 10th item. Because at the beginning you got item 1 is not numbered 1. So there's 10 items. So we're doing number 9, but it's actually the 10th item and the last item, I think. Yes. So the man says, it really is, you get an idea. It actually can be a tremendous experience. So this may be someone else talking. And what I'm getting at is when a jazz group improvises, they have an idea before they start. See? Of what? So it is the same guy. Frank says, they had an idea of what they were supposed to do before they started, too. So he's talking about his own group here. They had an idea of what they were supposed to do before they started, too. I told them what not to play. I told them what I didn't want to hear. It may sound kind of tyrannical, but the idea was we have these conductors up here who are actually helping to compose the piece. The conductor, in this instance, is more than a conductor. He's the assistant composer. And I have the total say-so over the other assistant composers over how I want it to sound. All I'm trying to do with this group in Opus 5 is make them create a piece of music on the spot the way I would like to have it played. You see, that's the whole of it. And when we were rehearsing, I just explained to them I didn't want any scale practicing and I didn't want any fooling around of that sort and playing of little tunes in there, things like that. And he goes, yes. And the female audience says, have you composed, I guess that's the best word you can use. Have you composed, I guess that's the best word you can use, any other music than what we've heard tonight? Any other radical? Zappa says, have I composed any other radical songs? The woman says, well, no, I didn't mean it that way. Then there's audience laughter. No, what we've heard tonight, have you done anything very much different than that? Zappa says, yes. Woman says, can you explain anything else? Zappa says, I sold a record to Capitol last Friday. Audience laughter. And you'll hear it on KFWB by next Friday. It's a rock and roll song. And I make my living doing things like that. And it's quite a bit different than what you've heard tonight. The name of the song is The Big Surfer. You can all go out and buy it. And so he's talking about being a commercial ditty manufacturer as well as this avant-garde guy. So then that's the end. That's the last comment by Frank. Then Carlos Hagen, the host of this radio show, comes on and says, and thus I come to the end of this program that today was dedicated to a very brief survey of the early musical beginnings of what I consider is one of the most talented and pioneering figures of the rock revolution of the 1960s. In the early 1960s, experimental avant-garde composer Frank Zappa, later the founder and leader of the famed Mother's Invention. I guess he said what I consider is one of the most talented pioneering figures of the rock revolution, and then he names them, but it's presented as another sentence. And he says, and this has been your host and producer, Carlos Hagen. Thank you very much for your attention. And Jim ends with the end. So, I wanted to read that into the record. I don't know how well you can hear this stuff on the recording, but are you guys there?
I'm here.
Yes.
Gee, oh shit, I deleted one of them. Damn. Accidentally deleted the stuff. But I can get Jim. I had to get him to send this stuff last week, because I didn't play it last week and then seemed to have lost it. So, awesome work.
He transcribed that from a YouTube video? He transcribed that from a YouTube video?
I think so, yeah. And the video is of the radio show broadcast by Carlos Hagen on KPFK. So it's just an audio, no visuals.
Oh, okay.
I think. I haven't gone through it. Okay, so we got half an hour left. What do we? Let's see. Oh, there's the interview that Bert sent. Okay, let's go to that. Now I have this interview, Bert. What'd you say?
Go to that.
Katie can't get enough. She doesn't want this to stop.
I know. I'm having a great time. I'm all caffeinated.
Yeah. What is this guy, Down with Her Man? She says, I'm proud to be an American because at least I know I'm fleeced. Then they say, Frank was the vitamin C of his age, pure ascorbic, or was that acerbic? That's a nice pun there, Down with Her Man. Ascorbic or acerbic? He was acerbic. Somebody calls himself, what is it? Rumpled Woodbeam. This one says, this guy's whack, man. He goes, Bert, the History-ion, the historian. Bert, the History-ion. Then he goes, wahaha. Then he says, Orphic Integratron Batman. Yes, the coffee pot is on, and yes, Bob has a bias. I don't have a fucking bias. Jeez, come on. I'm the least biased guy available. Let's see. All right. Now, this article from Telos magazine, which is a lefty, postmodern, post-Adorno, Baudrillard, and all those guys that Arthur Croker is an expert in, their magazine, I bought that issue, and it was the meeting of two different worlds, because Zappa is going to be interviewed by a guy who celebrates writers that Frank never heard of. So it's an interesting meeting. So it's called The Mother of All Interviews, Zappa on Music and Society. And it comes out in spring 1991, Telos, T-E-L-O-S, by Florindo Volpaccio. Now, we always push the boundaries of what is musically acceptable. Though influenced by Perez and Stravinsky, his disdain for the way music is accommodated in contemporary culture and his desire to address it with satire, humor, parody, and a sardonic wit is reminiscent of Eric Satie. The following discussion begins with the problem of modernism in music, but it immediately moves on to the issues of the culture industry, which is the phrase I think Adorno invented, the culture industry. So, on the cover of this issue, they have Frank's profile looking at Adorno. So Adorno was a hyper expert on modern classical music, and Stravinsky and Schoenberg and all these guys, but he became very alienated, and he couldn't even deal with the radical students that were his students in the late 60s. The college student revolution was happening, and he was a major sort of revolutionary, and he couldn't take it. The kids went beyond his parameters. So he was stiff and died around then, 69, 70. So he couldn't take the changes, where Frank could. So one stiff guy up against a not-so-stiff guy. Volpaccio starts off, I would like to begin by asking what you think of Adorno's music. So I guess some music that Adorno made or created was played for Frank. Frank says, the music sounds like what happens if you tried to write something just like Webern and filled in all the empty spaces. Some of the things I liked, but I liked them because they reminded me of Webern. The choral piece was Son of Das Augenlicht, and there's an orchestral piece in there that sounds like it could have been from Webern's 5 orchestral pieces. The piece I liked the best was the most old-fashioned one, the tonal chromatic piece. It sounds more like what Wagner would have sounded like if he knew what he was doing. It reminded me of a cross between Wagner and Fauré. The other stuff seems to be aesthetically in the region of Webern's aesthetic, with the aroma of Berg minus the turgid flux. You can think of it as enjoyable Schoenberg, but it did not come off to me as scholastic. All right. I thought there was a Webern aesthetic harmonically and melodically in most of the music, but the thing that wasn't Webern was how it filled up all the spaces. I did not hear any forward-looking compositional ideas there, because everything that I had heard, with the exception of the earliest, I presume it was the earliest piece, the one that was the most melodic, were all things I had heard in one form or another in the music of the Viennese School of Vienna. If I had more familiarity with the music of Schoenberg, I could probably point out the names of the pieces that sound like they were clones. I am more familiar with all the Webern pieces, and I just heard a lot of things in there that sounded very derivative of Webern. I don't know who did the work first. Volpaccio. Speaking of the Viennese school, do you see the collapse of functional tonality and common time to be the single most important development in modern music? Zappa says, no. The single most important development in modern music is making a business out of it. You have reached the point where you can't just sit down and write because you know how to write, and you love to write, and eventually somebody will listen because they love to listen, and maybe somebody will play it because they'll want to play it. That is gone. The point where anybody who composes has to deal with the mechanics of the performance world, especially as it is characterized in American society, has to have a major impact on what you write. For example, one of my pet theories is that the leading cause of minimalism is reduced budgets for rehearsal and reduced budgets for ensemble size. If a guy wants to write something and he knows that there are only a couple of minutes available for rehearsal, there's no way he's going to write some massive thing for an orchestra. There's no incentive to do it because it will never be performed and it will never be rehearsed. How can a person be concerned about atonality versus tonality when the real question is how do you get anything played, whatever it is? Volpaccio says, you've always favored Stravinsky and Varese as more interesting sources for the development of modern music. Why have you preferred the French developments of modern music over those of the Germans? Frank says, well, you see, that's not the point. You talk about development as if a person has to abandon the way things ordinarily sound in order to think it has been developed. I think that if you write music, you should write for your own taste, whatever you like to hear, whatever style you want to write it in, for whatever reason. It's a matter of expression rather than a matter of living and dying by a certain popular style, whatever that style is. The 12-tone school at one point was a popular style up until there was a change in funding at the university level for different types of composition. I refer back to this anecdote that I heard about a guy from one of the foundations saying, we no longer fund that whole post-Weberian school of composers who were doing all kinds of serial experimentation. That was the approved method of expression in the academic world. Suddenly they stopped funding that and started funding minimalism. And this was an anecdote that I heard around 1983 when I gave an address to the American Society of University Composers. I think that was in 1984, but not sure. So it did become, I remember reading it in 1984. So it did become a trend, and it did become a style. And let's say a person wanted to write completely melodic music. Well, at the time, 12-tone style was all that was being funded and all that was being accepted as serious modern music. Then people would laugh at you if your composition could be hummed or remembered. Volpaccio, but don't you think that this is also due to the change in the audiences? Zappa says, yes, they get smaller. Volpaccio, but they have not with minimalism. Zappa says, well, minimalism is a different story because it's hard to imagine Schoenberg doing an ad for Dwarf Scotch. Minimalism is a different story because it's hard to imagine Schoenberg doing an advertisement for Dwarf Scotch. Minimalism, I think, is a perfect form of music to express the spiritual condition of the 80s. Volpaccio, well, that's important here. Zappa always sort of presenting a musical echo of the sociology of the day.
Yeah.
He's like the anthropologist, the news journalist. Okay, Volpatchy says, yet minimalism sees itself as a form of music which includes eclectic, popular elements recognizable by an audience as a necessary response to the abstractness of modernism. I'll read that again. Minimalism sees itself as a form of music which includes eclectic, no, Volpatchy is saying this. It's a form of music which includes eclectic, popular elements recognizable by an audience as a necessary response to the abstractness of modernism. Consequently, the music is more approachable, says Volpatchy. Zappa says, there is a certain merit to that argument. But then, on the other hand, if that's true, then all they are doing is helping to create the wallpaper to the contemporary lifestyle. There is a certain function to it, but it is really not an integral part of the fabric of contemporary American life. It's the only way in which a composer can function in contemporary American life at all. That is, to do this shallow, empty, repetitive, disposable stuff and then verify it or rationalize it by saying that is the way the society is, and we poor composers only reflect the way the society is. There's a certain amount of truth to that, but then on the other hand, why the fuck bother to listen to it? Patchy says, when you can hear, let's say, a Rolling Stones song promoting a commercial product, what does that say about the inherent properties of modern composition or songwriting if music can be appropriated for such ends? Zappa says, well, if you think of a Rolling Stones song as a modern composition, you could bemoan the fact that it winds up being used in a commercial. But I believe that at the time most of that material was manufactured, the goal was to make money, not to create an anthem for a generation. I am making a distinction between the rock and roll and the so-called contemporary art music. You would have to be a lunatic to think you could make money from doing the contemporary art music no matter what style you were writing in. So the Rolling Stones were business people, commercial music. All right, Volpatchy, yet in your music, despite the overlapping influences, you do consciously maintain a separation of styles and musical forms. Do you see a distinction between high and low art? Zappa goes, or any art at all? He's questioning even the category. However, now think of that in creativity, in terms of creativity, Katie. However, with the increasing appropriation of elements, if not outright songs, of popular music by the serious music world, is rock and roll the new classicism? Okay, this is what Volpatchy says. However, with the increasing appropriation of elements, if not outright songs, of popular music by the serious music world, is rock and roll the new classicism? Zappa says, no. My recollection of the development of the history of rock and roll music is that from the point where the songs were being performed by young performers, note, not old blues singers or jazz musicians, teenagers started doing it and recording it. Basically, they did a bunch of songs about their girlfriends, and that was fairly real. That was the early days of doo-wop music. And from then on, they started getting corporate assistance, first from the guys with the cigars sticking out of their mouths in the Brill building, who said, hey, I could write one of those. They realized that the biggest profit from a record is in the writing and publishing. You started seeing more of a business involvement of people who really didn't care about a song, about, well, fill the girl's name in the blank for the title of the song. It was just, okay, I know what the style is, and because I am a professional songwriter, I can do this. This eventually turned into corporate rock. So there's nothing classic about that as far as I'm concerned. It is certainly valid and consumable lifestyle material and certainly reflects what's going on in the society, good, bad, and indifferent. The message is tucked away in the music. The goal of creating that kind of material is to make product, not to do composition. I always make a distinction between songwriters and composers. So he thought trying to help people or do some other level is composition, whereas the Rolling Stones were just making product. Okay, songwriters versus composers. Volpatchy says, there are those who feel rock music offers an opportunity for undermining the consumer culture. Now, you read all this, right, Bert? Oh, maybe Bert's blocked off. Let's see. Yes, you guys are all blocked off. Sorry. Okay.
Yes, I read it, Bob.
Yeah, do you mind hearing it again?
No, I don't. It's really it's interesting to give someone a view of Frank's sociological, anthropological view of how the music is today. it gets really thick, easier to, just get to see the picture of what's going on now as it goes later in this article about lip sync.
Well, what year was this written?
This was interviewed, oral, 91. In late 1990, published in spring 91.
Okay.
I'm assuming it took a while for them to do it.
Yeah.
It's an academic journal.
I'll just interject, too. Like now, with Napsterization of music, really one of the primary ways, let me say, that musicians make money is by letting their songs be in commercials and letting their songs be in TV shows.
Yeah.
And it's instant. It used to be there would be an ad for Pledge, and it would be the lemon tree is so pretty and the lemon smells so sweet. And it would take like forever to be able to let that song be used in a commercial. And now it's immediate. Like the song is out, and it's Selena Gomez's hit song, and she's singing it on a Pantene commercial all at once.
Mm-hmm. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay.
But they don't try to even disguise the song anymore. Like it used to be the song was just, it hinted at a song.
Right.
And now it's literally... The artist she's selling the shampoo, she's using the shampoo, her song's in the shampoo, you're gonna buy the shampoo and the song at the same time.
Right. Okay, I just got to tell Bill we're ending part 1 this hour in 15 minutes, just so we know that.
Boo.
Okay, is that going to go up there? There it is. And now I press the panic button so Bill can hear it. Okay, back to this thing. Volpatchu says, there are those who feel rock music offers an opportunity for undermining the consumer culture. Zappa says, I don't buy that. The reason I don't buy it is because, at its best, rock music is a folk art form when it comes directly from the people who may know how to play 1 or 2 songs on their instruments, and those 1 or 2 songs mean something to the people who wrote them and sing them. Well, Paccio, are you referring to the Bob Dylans of the world? Zappa says, that's on a more sophisticated level. I'm talking about Cannibal and the Headhunters, little one-shot groups, the guys who got together who really are not looking forward to a long-term career. But they have that one song that is their song, and they are into it, and they play it for all it's worth. And it's their personal expression of how they feel at the time they managed by some miracle to get their song on a record. That is when rock is really doing its job. It's kind of a democratic art form because it lets people who are not certified as musicians or composers or songwriters to sneak in there and say something. But things like that are more and more rare. Volpatcio says, however, the point I would like to make is that despite the intentions of the guys who create the product, it appears that the music, for the audience at least, often carries more of a message than may ever have been intended. Isn't this how a song becomes the anthem of a generation? Isn't this what really differentiates rock music from other forms of popular music? The ability to somehow mystically capture the experience of a generation regardless of what may have inspired the song? Even more to the point, if you take the example of the Sex Pistols, Zappa just says, they were manufactured. Volpatcio, yes, they are a prime example of a band put together to exploit the countercultural market of the music business. Yet, ironically, they were a serious inspiration for a new generation of rock musicians and audiences who saw in them precisely the potential of rock to challenge the corporate culture that had absolutely appropriated rock by the mid-1970s. So it's like the leftist part of this interviewer is coming out. Zappa goes, great. He says, great, hum me one of their songs. Are we talking about music or are we talking about sociology? Basically, what you are describing to me is a commercial game which has been played. As far as I am concerned, this has nothing to do with music. I'm glad that someone sneaks in there and makes a mockery of the business, but how much of a mockery is it if they wind up being sold and distributed by the same business that they intend to mock? Well, Patchu says, but doesn't the business need these types of bands to allow it to identify where the new markets are for the next generation that wants to commercially colonize? Zappa says, no major school of rock music ever occurred without being able to dress up to it. In other words, you can't have a trend in music as far as pop music goes unless there is a costume that you can wear that goes along with it, that lets the consumer participate in the fantasy. So that is really when you're talking about looking for a market. This is what McLuhan said. Teen music is not music. It's an environment, and that's what Frank's pointing out. You've got to have your fashion. You've got to have your other props in there. If a new group comes along, in order for it to be a really mega group, there has to be some way to either imitate their hairdo or to imitate their clothes. It has nothing to do with the music. This is the marketing aspect of it. The companies are not going to invest heavily to promote a group just because they sing well, play well, or write well. The bucks are going to go into that group when somebody in an office sniffs the possibility of cooperative advertising and cooperative promotions with soft drinks, with alcoholic beverages, with clothing manufacturers, with shoe manufacturers, with jewelry manufacturers. Volpatio says, do you see this as the attempt by the business to exploit the absolute identification of the consumer with his product? Zappa, I'm sure that is in the back of the mind of just about everybody who makes a product. They're either going to do it through some kind of star endorsement or find some other way to tie their product more intimately to the popular culture. Because if it is involved with the culture, it gives the illusion that the product itself has a more exalted, inherent value if it is something that functions in the culture. Coca-Cola is the best example. Basically, it is carbonated brown water as far as I'm concerned. But the way in which it has become intertwined with the American flag and every other thing. For example, I was flipping through C-SPAN yesterday, and they had a roundtable discussion about the base closings of military bases. The guy who was head of this organization dealing with base closing, his last job was head of the National Soft Drink Manufacturers Association. And the fellow who introduced him made the comment that, well, no matter what happens in terms of closing these bases, I'm sure that they'll always be selling Coke and Pepsi at them. It was sort of meant to be a joke, but that's kind of the way it is, no matter what happens economically and otherwise in this country. It was sort of meant to be a joke, but that's kind of the way it is, no matter what happens economically and otherwise in this country. If you want to really have something for the country to rally around, there's always that soft drink industry.
Hey, Bob, did you know that the American Idol judges sit with Pepsi glasses in front of them?
No, I've never seen the show. I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, they all sit there, and they're all drinking out of great, big Pepsi glasses.
Well, we know what that is, right? That's MK Ultra, CIA, alien invasion stuff, right? They live...
I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know.
No, that's all product placement, right? Imagine how billions of dollars Pepsi had to pay to get that position.
Yeah, but it was interesting that Frank was talking about that. That's why I asked when the article was written. Like, it's even worse now. I mean, not that it's necessarily bad, it is what it is, but he was remarking about that. We were on that trajectory.
He saw it coming. Frank saw it coming.
And, like, American Idol is the hit maker.
Yeah. Okay. Volbachia says, do you really believe the songs themselves help sell the products? Or is that just a fantasy among advertisers? Zappa says, I think that it works two ways. There may be some boost in sales when, for example, Michael Jackson did the 2-minute commercial in the middle of the Grammys a few years ago. These kinds of things may give a little boost in sales. But one of the reasons these kinds of companies especially have to tie themselves to pop culture is they need some reason to exist, to identify with whatever is contemporary. Volpatio.
Well,
what you were saying.
And I find, can I say something right here? I think it's ironic, too, that Pepsi commercial is when Michael Jackson set his hair on fire, which got him addicted to painkillers, which led to his taking of the propofol and all of his problems.
Right. Yeah, you start going around with a bit of vanity, look out. You start thinking you should be replicated in some media format, look out. The good Lord's coming to get you. You're just you best remain humble and polite and yes sir, no sir attitude. That'll save you from every pollution. As Zappa said, if you stand on a street corner, there's 200 ways for you to be killed in America. 200 ways. So, Are we addressing your issues there, Katie?
Yeah, all my issues. All my issues.
All right. Oh, by the way, congratulations on your new job promotion.
Oh, thank you.
All right, Valpetra says, so Frank's saying it works two ways. There may be, the question, do you really believe the songs themselves help sell the products, or is it just a fantasy among advertisers? I think that it works two ways. There may be some boost in sales when, for example, Michael Jackson did the 2-minute commercial in the middle of the Grammys a few years ago. These kinds of things may give a little boost in sales. Oh, we already did that. But one of the reasons these kinds of companies especially have to tie themselves to pop culture is they need some reason to exist, to identify with whatever is contemporary. Well, Patchy says, what you are saying then is that the only way you can sell something is by being thought to be hip and modern, which is very much associated with American culture. Zappa says, right. You tie your product to the latest rock video act. You sponsor that act's tour. You put your signs up all over the place when that act comes to town. It's not just that the act has appeared in your commercial on television. The act winds up being a salesman for your product every place it goes. The problem with that is the shelf life of the contemporary rock music act is not that long, so that they are going to be constantly searching for new things to identify with. I guess he means the corporations. Valpaccio, is this affecting the way new acts break into the business? Zappa says, I don't think it's possible to function as a real touring artist in the music business today without some sort of corporate sponsorship because the costs are so high. The only way you can expect to make a profit on a tour is to have that subsidization. Valpaccio, this also brings up the question of live performances versus recorded performances. Most popular music acts today appear to function primarily in the studio, and the live performances attempt to reproduce the recorded performance. There's less spontaneity and improvisation, not to mention the sense of musicianship necessary to perform before a live audience. In short, live performances also appear to be more and more programmed. Do you attribute this to the way audiences have become acculturated to music primarily through recordings? Do you attribute this to the way audiences have become acculturated to music primarily through recordings? Zappa says, it is the group's fault. You can't blame this on the audiences. Ultimately, it is their music and their reputation. They are not slaves. It is a conscious decision on the part of the groups to go out and do this. Well, Patchy says, don't producers, though, play a large influence on how music gets recorded? Don't producers, though, play a large influence on how music gets recorded? Zappa says, but producers have nothing to do with the live performance situation. Valpaccio, yet, if a touring group wants to make an audience happy, and the best way to achieve this is by reproducing something familiar, and this means reproducing the familiarity of the recording is shaped by the producer, Zappa says, well, let us take a look at the original recording. Is it a work of art or is it a piece of product? If it is a product, then what do? You are out there to sell the product, so naturally you will want to replicate the product. You go out and be a jukebox. Valpaccio says, but the way that product has been produced in the recording studio has also affected the way people listen to music. So he's actually describing McLuhanistically the statement that Frank says that McLuhan said, we live entirely by music. Music is a medium involving all the media. It's merged with it like a page of Fitting's Wake, and it's not just the ear anymore. It's tactile synchronicity, or synesthesia. So he's discussing the environment, and if given a chance, that's what he does in a lot of his interviews. Okay.
And it's gone way beyond just hairstyles and clothes. It's really, and soft drinks, it's really every product.
Yeah.
Douches, shampoos, deodorants, perfumes. I mean, it's everything.
Yeah, remember that movie a couple of years ago? Sort of a radical movie where the woman was being offered a refreshing of her career if she agreed that all her music can mutate into every other object. Don't remember what it was called, but...
no, but you've got to find out because I've got to see that. What is it?
Okay. All right. Email me to remind me to look it up.
Okay. All right.
So he's asking, by the way, that product that's been produced in the recording studio has also affected the way people listen to music. Frank says, the way people listen to music is more to do with MTV than it does with the producers. So there's the TV, the given TV environment. Part of the problem when you are doing the live performance is that you will never look as good as your video. Unless your video is some exalted version of a live performance and you take the same 10,000 lamp rig on the road with you and do all that stuff. At that point, you can't afford to do it unless you are subsidized. All the so-called concept videos, there is no way to replicate that aroma on stage. It's still basically just a band and some amplifiers, unless you're going to spend a lot of money on sets. The people who engage in this kind of business practice, designing audio products for sale and then promoting it with replications that are as close to the original product as possible, they do not have any qualms about going out there and lip-syncing. Well, Pat, but have you not commented elsewhere on how difficult it is to play instrumental music because of the audience's declining attention span? Zappa, it's only going to get worse if you don't try to give the audience something different to listen to. There you have it. You can go to Telos and read the rest of it. That's the end of our Zappa series for now. Who knows what will happen next? The special Ike Willis, How Frank Was Murdered, will be tagged on at the end of this series, whenever that end arrives. So, today's show has been dedicated to the great scholar of Frank Zappa, Roxana Flores Lorenzo.